You cheated on me, didn't you? My husband Tom was holding our newborn baby and shouted right in front of me. I had just finished the huge task of giving birth and returned to my hospital room, and that's what my husband said to me. What are you talking about? I had absolutely no idea what he meant. I've been faithful to Tom since before we got married, and I have no reason to do something like that after getting married. I couldn't understand why he would say such a thing, and I was furious that he would say that to his wife right after giving birth. This baby's eyes are blue. You cheated on me with a foreigner, didn't you? That's impossible! I yelled back without thinking. I retorted while enduring the pain in my body. Tom quickly put the baby in the bassinet, as if he had touched something dirty. I was angry that he reacted that way to our own child. I picked the baby back up. The baby suddenly opened its eyes. They were clear blue eyes, like glass. How? Both Tom and I have brown eyes. I've never seen eyes this blue before. I really didn't cheat on you. I have no idea why this happened. Don't lie. There's no other explanation except that you cheated. I'm telling you, it's not possible. I really don't know why. I gave birth to this child myself, so there's no doubt it's my baby. I've never heard of any foreigners in my or Tom's family. If that's the case, I truly don't understand why this child has blue eyes. Please, let's do a DNA test. A DNA test should prove this child's relationship to Tom. When I desperately pleaded, Tom stared at me intently. If this child isn't yours, I'll divorce you. I'll even pay alimony. But I really have no idea how this happened. This is your child. Please, just let me prove it. Tom's voice echoed in the silent hospital room. His answer was, "My name is Sophie. I'm turning 29 this year. I work an office job at a company in Boston. I was born in the South, but I've lived in Boston ever since I got into college. I'm married to Tom, who is 1 year older than me, and we live together. Tom works at a sports equipment company. Having grown up in a snowy area, I joined the ski club as soon as I started college. Tom was an upperclassman in the club at the time. He wasn't as used to snow as I was. But he loves sports and got hooked on skiing during a high school trip, so he went to ski resorts whenever he had the chance after that. He's quite skilled. Tom and I hit it off right away, since we both wanted to improve our skiing techniques. We always participated in the club's ski trips together, so naturally we started spending more time together and got closer. Then 6 months later, Tom said he wanted to date me seriously. That's how we became a couple, and our relationship progressed smoothly after that. After graduating, we both started working in Boston. I had become a working adult 1 year earlier. I moved into Tom's apartment and we started living together. Of course, the reason we chose to live together was that we wanted to be with each other. But that wasn't the only reason. Before graduating, we had discussed that we wanted to get married eventually, so establishing a financial foundation came first. If I lived in Tom's place, we could put all the rent money into savings instead. That way we could save up for our wedding faster. With that in mind, we cut back on ski trips until we had enough saved up. Eventually, Tom and I both gained more work experience and felt like we could continue our jobs long term. We reached our savings goal. Thrilled that we could finally get married, we decided to meet each other's parents first. My parents live far away, so both of us would need to take time off to visit them. Inevitably, we ended up going to Tom's parents' place first. Actually, Tom had only recently told his parents about dating me. Apparently they're old-fashioned and believe unmarried couples should keep their relationship pure. It's a very traditional area, so my parents don't approve of premarital relationships until the future is decided. My hometown is rural too, so I get it. Times have changed, but it can't be helped. That's why they think you and I are still living separately. If they ask, just go along with that. We had this conversation and firmly swore to absolutely never reveal that we were already living together before heading to Tom's parents' house. Tom's family runs a small woodworking business, with a factory located next to their home. The factory was originally started by Tom's grandfather, and his father-in-law Dylan is now the second-generation owner. They employ a handful of skilled craftsmen who create custom furniture and interior decor pieces using locally sourced wood. Although it's a small operation, they have long-standing business relationships with companies dating back to Tom's grandfather's days, so while it's not an easy business, they seem to be doing relatively well compared to others in the same trade. When I was a kid, Dad always told me, "Tom, you're going to take over as the boss one day, so start learning the ropes now." I was constantly made to help out at the factory. So when I decided to go to college, Dad wasn't happy about it. Has Dylan decided who will take over the factory after him? No, the craftsmen we have now are skilled but have zero interest in the business side of things. We've tried training younger workers, but no one sticks around long. I think Dad still hopes I'll come back and take over. Do you have any intentions of coming back here in the future, Tom? No way. I enjoy my current job that allows me to be involved with skiing. If I ever change careers, it would have to be something ski-related or I definitely wouldn't last. I was relieved to hear there was no chance of Tom taking over his family's factory. Inheriting the business would inevitably mean I'd be expected to support him and put down roots in that area too. I couldn't imagine living in an unfamiliar place, having to tiptoe around my seemingly old-fashioned parents-in-law. During that first visit to Tom's family home, I came face to face with Tom's parents, who would soon officially become my parents-in-law. We were shown to the living room where I deeply bowed my head to them. I'm sure I have many shortcomings, but I will do my best to support Tom. I hope for your kind guidance for many years to come. Yes, of course. I had pondered my words for days and even practiced, but my mother-in-law Caddy simply brushed them off. It was a bit anticlimactic. Still, at least Caddy had replied. Dylan stayed sullenly silent without a word, making me worried I had somehow angered him. But then Tom immediately started a normal conversation, so I figured these two must always be this distant. By the way, Sophie, what do you do for work? It was the first time Caddy properly spoke to me. I had expected her to ask about my upbringing or hometown at a time like this, so it threw me off that her first question was about my job. Nevertheless, I explained that I work an office job. And about how much do you make annually? She followed up, leaving me momentarily at a loss for words. Is that really something you suddenly ask your son's fiancé? Tom quickly interjected. That's not something you ask so bluntly, and warned his mother for me. But even after that, they peppered me with rather blatant questions at every turn, like the rent for the place I live now, and how much property and assets my parents own. Honestly, it was exhausting to field what felt like an interrogation into my and my family's financial situation. I snuck a glance at Tom beside me, who was sending me an apologetic look. Given that Tom's family has made their living running a factory for generations, perhaps they have very strict views about money. The barrage of questions earlier may have been their way of ascertaining whether I or any of my relatives are in debt. And if so, whether there was any risk of their son getting dragged into it. Maybe he wanted to confirm something like that. If they're just concerned about their son being suddenly saddled with a huge debt after marriage, I guess I can understand their perspective to some extent. At the time, I tried not to dwell on it too much. As soon as Caddy finished her spiel, Dylan opened his mouth as if he'd been waiting for his cue. Well then, why don't you go ahead and take a tour of the factory right away? His words caught me off guard. Just when I thought Dylan had finally deigned to speak to me, he's suggesting a factory tour out of the blue. Of course, it's his future son-in-law's family business, and I should probably have some idea of what it entails. But I can still hear the sound of machinery operating in the factory even now. Surely they don't expect me to go introduce myself to the employees on the spot like this, do they? The thought made me a bit nervous. You don't have to remember everything all at once. As Dylan started to stand up while saying this, Tim stopped him. Both of you, cut it out already. We came today with the intention of just making introductions. There's no need to show her the factory, is there? Besides, what do you mean she doesn't have to remember it all at once? When she doesn't have to remember anything at all? Chastened by Tim's forceful tone, Dylan reluctantly sat back down. Tim was absolutely right. It was clear from Dylan's choice of words that he was assuming I would eventually support Tim in taking over the factory. Apparently, Dylan still harbors hopes of having Tim inherit the business. At this point, I was starting to feel a very distinct sense of wariness towards these in-laws. showing such blatant interest in my financial situation upon first meeting, and scheming from the start to tie me to the family factory that goes beyond just being tactless, in my opinion. This is a bit of an unbelievable situation. I understand that marrying Tim means inevitably being connected to these people. But I was realizing with stark clarity that having a close relationship with them in my daily life would be impossible. Sensing the increasingly tense atmosphere, Tim stepped in. "Any further discussion can wait until we meet again." With that, he wrapped things up and we were done. As we were about to leave, Caddy was trying to tell Tim something in a low voice while walking with us. Tim was clearly exasperated as he dealt with her. And so, I was finally able to get away from Tim's family home. I found out later that Caddy's parting complaint to him were, "Just because you're married doesn't mean you should become distant from your family. Make sure you think carefully and visit home." It seemed like a pretty blatant guilt trip, but from Caddy's perspective, maybe she feels a sense of loneliness, as if I've stolen Tim away from her. But Tim seems exhausted by both Dylan pressuring him to take over the factory and Caddy constantly demanding excessive family time. He clearly has no desire to see them frequently. Of course, it's not like their relationship is hostile. Quirks aside, I'm sure Tim's parents act this way because they care about him. And Tim himself doesn't seem to want to stir up discord with them either. I wanted to respect Tim's feelings too. However, after talking to them for the first time today, I knew with absolute certainty that I couldn't handle a life with frequent meddling from those in-laws. I told Tim my honest feelings. I even conveyed that if there was any possibility of living with those two, it might make marriage itself difficult. Of course I love Tim, but I'm convinced that I'd be unable to maintain my peace of mind living together with those people.
My parents can be unintentionally overbearing with their opinions sometimes, so it's totally understandable that you feel that way, Sophie.
That's what Tim said.
I'm not considering ever living with them long term. And I absolutely won't let our lives get so intertwined that you end up dealing with their interference, Sophie.
He promised. I didn't want to reconsider my decision to get married, so I was truly relieved when he said that. However, even though we refrained from contacting them, my in-laws didn't do the same. Immediately after the greetings, my in-laws started making various proposals and demands to us. The most troublesome thing was their meddling in our wedding plans. "Tim is our only son and he's precious to us, so we want you to have the wedding in the way that has been passed down in this family for generations." They kept insisting persistently. From an early stage, Tim and I had planned to have the wedding ceremony in a church and the reception as a small-scale event with only close relatives and friends. But Tim's parents even demanded that we hold the ceremony in their hometown. Furthermore, when they said we should make the reception bigger so they could invite many of their relatives, I felt anger welling up inside me. I don't want them interfering with our important ceremony. I told Tim that I wanted him to make them stop meddling any further. Of course, Tim felt the same way I did, but he looked pained being caught between his parents and me, so this time I decided to yield. Considering our life after marriage, I told my in-laws that we wanted to postpone the ceremony until we could save up a bit more money so we wouldn't use up all our savings on just the wedding, and smoothed things over for the moment. And so, our married life started while postponing the ceremony. I told my colleagues at work and friends that we decided to use the money for the reception on our daily life instead. Most of our acquaintances of the same generation agreed it was a more rational and better choice. For me, it was disappointing not being able to have a wedding ceremony, but I was very happy that we could officially submit the marriage registration and become husband and wife. And finally, our married life began. We were already living together, but living with a clear perspective on how we would overcome the rest of our lives together felt very fresh. And avoiding direct contact with my in-laws didn't cause anything in particular that made the relationship deteriorate. 2 years passed by in a flash, and I became pregnant with Tim's child and gave birth to a healthy baby boy without any issues. When I returned to my hospital room from the delivery room, Tim, who had been eagerly awaiting my son and I, walked up and held our child for the first time. I expected him to let out a cry of joy, but instead, doubtful words reached my ears as I finished giving birth.
His eyes are blue. Why? Is this child not mine?"
I couldn't understand what he meant. Why was Tim glaring at me with such a grim expression? I tried to think with my still exhausted and dazed mind, but nothing came to mind.
What are you saying? That child is yours, Tim. What's wrong with his eyes? Look for yourself. His eyes are blue. Those aren't the eyes of our family. Since you undoubtedly gave birth to him, doesn't that mean he has a blue-eyed foreigner for a father? Are you saying I cheated on you? I absolutely never did such a thing. Then why are his eyes blue? Both of us have brown eyes. I've never heard of a blue-eyed child being born between two brown-eyed people.
I tried to say something in return, but a nurse who came running in surprise at the commotion intervened, and the situation settled down for the moment. After some time passed, I spoke with Tim again. Tim had regained his composure on the surface, but his eyes were still harsh as he looked at me. More than anything, he wouldn't even try to hold our son. He thought I had cheated on him with a blue-eyed man who wasn't him and gave birth to that man's child. I had absolutely never betrayed him like that. However, the fact was that our son's eyes were blue. I couldn't explain the reason why.
It's not that you can't explain, you just don't want to admit you cheated, right? Please believe me. There must be some way we can investigate this.
I somehow managed to say that, and just as it occurred to me that we could surely prove it if we had the genes tested, my in-laws burst into the hospital room.
Dad, Mom, why are you here?
Tim raised his voice in surprise. Tim shouldn't have told my in-laws that I had gone into labor, being considerate of how I wanted to avoid meeting them as much as possible. Of course, we couldn't not inform them of the birth, but we had intended to let them know after both the baby and I had fully settled down after the delivery.
I have an acquaintance among the nurses here.
And of course she knows about Tim, so she went out of her way to let us know that our grandchild was about to be born.
Not informing us of the birth of our first grandchild, what an unfilial son. Well, I guess I was kind of the same when you were born though.
The two of them had the biggest smiles on their faces that I had ever seen.
You just had a baby, so why do you have such a displeased look on your face? Yeah, the child was born healthy. But since I found out it's not mine, of course I'd have this kind of expression.
At the words Tim spat out, my in-laws exchanged glances with a look of incomprehension. Eventually, my mother-in-law peered at the baby's face and let out a loud voice.
It's true. This isn't Tim's child. Look at his eyes, he has blue eyes. What did you say?
My father-in-law, who had also shouted and stared at the baby.
You're right. His eyes are blue. I've never seen a child with eyes like that,
he said, turning back to face me. What is the meaning of this, Sophie? Were you planning on tricking Tim into raising some foreigner's child? What an appalling woman.
I thought you seemed rather distant when we met, but to think you had such intentions. That's not it. There must be some reason for this. I'm sure we'll understand if we investigate.
It was painful to have them hurl such heart-wrenching words at me one after another. But what hurt the most was that Tim, who should have been protecting me, was glaring at me together with my in-laws. A nurse, unable to bear watching my in-laws shouting in further agitation, calling me an adulterous woman and saying they'd make me pay compensation and divorce, ushered them out of the room. When she said she would call the police if they continued making a commotion and disturbing the mental stability of the patient, my in-laws finally withdrew quietly. I had fallen from the heights of being blessed with a son to the depths of despair. More than anything, the shock of being turned away by Tim, who should have been my greatest ally, left me unable to even shed tears and simply dumbfounded. After a while, my in-laws said,
"There's no point in looking at the face of someone else's child,"
and left. Tim sat silently with an air of not wanting to even look at the baby I was holding.
I rushed out of the office because you went into labor, so what am I supposed to say when my colleagues congratulate me? Ugh.
I learned for the first time that Tim was capable of such cruelty. As I sat there unable to say anything more, Tim stood up.
I'm not coming here anymore,
he said coldly and tried to leave the room. Was this the end of my relationship with Tim and we would get divorced? The anxiety of whether this child would suddenly lose his father washed over me.
Hey, wait! I know it's impossible to just ask you to believe me. So at least, before you end your relationship with me, Please listen to one last request from me.
Hearing that, Tim reluctantly stopped in his tracks.
Please ask the hospital to do a DNA test. The results should be available in about a week. If it determines he's not your child, then you can abandon me. You can even demand compensation. I haven't betrayed you. Even if we find out much later when the child grows up that he is yours, it will be too late to start over as father and son then.
My final plea seemed to reach Tim's heart, if only slightly. Tim said,
Fine. That will make the truth clear.
And left the room. After that, I wasn't in any state of mind to talk to anyone. I told the nurse that I couldn't see anyone else until my parents, whom I had contacted as soon as I went into labor, arrived, and had her refuse any visitors. That night, my parents, who had forcibly transferred trains to get there, rushed to the hospital barely in time for visiting hours. The moment I saw my parents' faces for the first time in a while, I shed tears of relief that someone had finally come who would be on my side.
You did really well.
What happened to Tim? Has he not come yet? Asked that, I hesitated over whether to tell them what had happened here until then. But I had nothing to be ashamed of, and I thought that if the results of the upcoming test came out, my relationship with Tim could be repaired, so I decided to keep quiet to avoid giving my parents unnecessary worry. I made the painful excuse that Tim had been with me until just before, but he had to go back to the office for a bit because there was some work he absolutely had to do himself. And my mother Lenore gently held my son, whom neither Tim nor my in-laws had held, and peered at his face. What kind of reaction would Lenore have upon seeing his blue eyes? If she reacted the same way as Tim and the others? Thinking that, I couldn't look at Lenore's face and inadvertently lowered my head.
Oh, how adorable. His features take after Tim, don't they? Let me see. Oh, you're right. But the shape of his nose resembles Sophie.
My father Sullivan also looked happy. It was a very ordinary reaction for grandparents seeing their first grandchild, but their response full of joy made me truly happy from the bottom of my heart.
Look, this child has blue eyes too. Just like when Sophie was born.
I reflexively raised my head.
What?
And let out a surprised. My eyes met those of my parents, who were smiling with faces full of affection. My eyes were blue when I was born too.
That's right. Oh, did we never tell you?
It wasn't that uncommon among our relatives. We probably didn't think it was worth mentioning. Wondering what on earth they were talking about, I asked for a more detailed explanation. My mother didn't have particularly detailed knowledge, but apparently my father had heard a more in-depth explanation from a doctor friend of his, so he explained it to me. Even if a person was born with blue eyes, there are cases where the color changes due to genetics. The frequency tends to be higher in the South when looking nationwide, and it's known that the area where I was born has an especially high tendency for that. And it's also apparently quite common for eyes that were blue to gradually approach the level of brown as the child grows. I was a child who fit that exact case. Indeed, I had been told a few times before that my eye color looked lighter. My eye color probably looks a bit lighter than other people's because what were originally blue eyes gradually turned brown. But since this wasn't an unusual story where I'm from, it seems my parents never mentioned it to me after I grew up. However, my mother said she must have told me about it a few times when I was little. If that's true, I may have just let it go in one ear and out the other. But I didn't care about such minor details. Knowing the reason why I had a blue-eyed child and that I could properly explain it to Tim now, the tears I had been holding back started flowing out. My parents, surprised by my sudden crying, held my shoulders in bewilderment. For a while, I just indulged in that sensation and continued crying. During that time, my son stayed cradled in my mother's arms, breathing peacefully in his sleep. Eventually, when my parents heard from me about what had just happened, they became furious. I had never seen my parents display such intense anger before. My parents immediately tried to call Tim, who had gone home earlier, to come back. But since visiting hours were almost over, they said they would meet Tim outside and left the hospital room. I heard later that my father had expressed his tremendous anger to Tim, saying,
"How could you not believe your wife's story at all, not even hold the baby, and go home like that?"
And Tim had been thoroughly contrite. He told Tim about the area where I was born and raised. about the mechanism behind the different eye color. He apparently even sent Tim photos of neighborhood children with blue eyes to show him. And Tim was apparently convinced by that. I was told that if my mother hadn't intervened at the end, my father looked ready to punch Tim. Hearing that Tim had apologized with tears in his eyes, saying he was truly sorry, I felt my intense anger towards him abate slightly. The next day, Tim took an emergency day off work and rushed to my hospital room first thing in the morning to apologize for his words and actions yesterday. I'm sorry. I had this preconceived notion that if both parents have brown eyes, the child will always be born with brown eyes too. I judged based solely on the bias that a child's eyes can't be blue unless one of the parents has blue eyes.
It's okay. I didn't know that my eyes were blue when I was little either. Or rather, I didn't remember. And the DNA test results aren't back yet, so right now I'm just happy you believe this story.
Tim promised to take responsibility for clearing up his parents' misunderstanding himself, and vowed not to create any more opportunities for me to come face to face with them in the future. Later, Tim called his parents home, but when that didn't work, he apparently ended up going directly to their house to explain the situation. However, it seems that even so, his parents wouldn't abandon their suspicion towards me. They stubbornly insisted that we still couldn't know until the DNA test results came back, and even criticized Tim for discarding his doubts so quickly. But this time, Tim had also looked into and come to understand that there was a possibility of blue-eyed children being born even from brown-eyed parents, and had come to believe in my innocence. However, no matter how much Tim explained those things, his parents wouldn't listen at all. On the contrary, they insulted us, saying we were just putting on an act and even getting the neighbors involved. They even went so far as to say that if Tim broke up with me and took over the factory soon, they would find him a better woman. Tim finally exploded in anger at their utter lack of obedience.
If you two continue to insult Sophie like this, I'm cutting ties with you.
And apparently stormed out, saying so. And about a week passed. Our son had no health issues whatsoever, and by then I had completely recovered from the initial uproar. And on the day I was discharged from the hospital with our son, the DNA test results arrived. Tim, who had purposely brought the unopened results all the way from home to my hospital room, opened the envelope in front of me. It stated that a high enough match rate to definitively say the baby was mine and Tim's child had been confirmed. Tim stared long and hard at the test results, and finally bowed his head deeply to me and said, "I'm truly sorry." I couldn't completely forgive him with just this apology after he had hurled such verbal abuse at me. But Tim had been convinced until that moment that a child inherits the eye color of either the father or mother. But I had thought the same thing. If the child born looked nothing like one's own at a glance, perhaps one would get flustered like that. Thinking that, I couldn't bring myself to say we should divorce. Tim, who apologized to me many times over, said he would tell his parents about these results and left the house. I didn't want to have any contact with his parents in any form, so I even thought it would be fine not telling them at all.
If we leave this misunderstanding as is, my parents might scheme something to make us divorce using this as a reason. They're already spreading rumors to the neighbors. So I have to properly convey the facts to them.
Hearing Tim say that, I decided to leave his parents to Tim and not think about it at all. Eventually, Tim returned after finishing the phone call and said with a relieved expression,
"I explained it to them properly. Just in case, I also took a photo of the test results and emailed it to them. I told them I'm not going to visit them in the future and asked them not to come see us either."
With those words, I could feel that all my connections to his parents had vanished. However, as I was preparing to be discharged and going through the procedures for billing and such, his parents showed up. After that phone call, they had immediately hailed a taxi and rushed over. I heard Tim, "I told them not to come," who was carrying our luggage, mutter,
"Sophie, I heard it's been proven the baby is Tim's son. That's great. Now everything can be smoothed over. Yeah, and it's a boy too. Thank you for giving birth to a healthy heir."
I was speechless. There's an expression to flip-flop on someone, but this wasn't like that at all. It was as if they had flipped the heavens and earth with how drastically their attitude had changed. Could it be the same mouths saying these words that had cursed me as an adulteress?
"Take this chance to divorce her and get compensation money.
and hurled insults at me just days ago. As I stood there dumbfounded, Tim, who had been standing in front of me, dropped his shoulders and crouched down on the spot. Tim apparently felt so deflated he couldn't stand at the sight of his parents' utterly self-centered behavior. As if not to miss that chance, my mother-in-law slipped past Tim and approached right in front of me.
Here, let me hold him.
I instinctively drew back from my mother-in-law, who was extending both hands. Then even my father-in-law approached. You too, as the child grows bigger your place will likely get too cramped, so you can come live with us. Luckily we have plenty of land, so we can even add on to the house. The grandchild will probably be happier with more liveliness too. I felt slightly dizzy. To think they'd even suggest living together. Perhaps they have no sense of shame. Staying with these people any longer would likely impede my postpartum recovery. But I didn't want to line up my words here and argue back either. No matter what I said, my father-in-law probably wouldn't listen, and more than anything, I didn't want to let my newborn son hear my angry voice. I brushed away my mother-in-law's hands that persistently kept reaching out trying to hold my son, approached the taxi they had arrived in, and conveyed my intention to get in with my gaze. Tim, who had been standing there dumbfounded, noticed my desire to leave this place as soon as possible and helped me get in, pushing aside his parents who were standing there stunned at being blatantly ignored.
Hurry and go!
Tim also got in and told the driver. The taxi immediately drove off, leaving the hospital behind. For a moment, I saw the sight of his dumbfounded parents seeing us off reflected in the side mirror, but I never looked back again. Later, Tim reluctantly answered one of the several calls that came in from his parents. In a cold voice, Tim told his parents on the other end of the line that he was cutting ties with them.
I want Dad and Mom to have absolutely no involvement in our lives anymore. To not even apologize to Sophie and suggest living together is unthinkable as human beings. I won't let either of you see Sophie or our son at all. Please don't think of our son as your grandchild. I'll never let you two meet him, so give up.
Saying that, he hung up and immediately did something on his mobile phone before putting it away. After that, no more calls came in, so I assumed he had blocked their numbers, but Tim told me without saying anything unnecessary that we would never be bothered about this matter again. However, knowing his parents, no matter how strongly Tim declared he was cutting ties with them, in the end they might even show up at our apartment. But even if his parents took such actions, I knew I no longer had to worry about anything. Actually, a little before our son was born, Tim had gotten a job as a ski resort manager through an introduction from an acquaintance. Tim had been so eager to work in a job related to skiing that he had specifically chosen to work at a sports equipment company. So when he received word of this position,
I definitely want to do it.
He was overjoyed and had replied. That place was in my hometown, where my parents also live. For me too, this job offer had the best possible conditions. If possible, I had wanted to give birth at a hospital there, but by the time this job change was decided, my due date was fast approaching. Transferring to a different hospital suddenly during this time was high risk, and more than anything, there were few hospitals that handled deliveries there and they were all full with local pregnant women. So in that case, we had decided I would give birth at the hospital here where I had been receiving regular checkups from the beginning. That was the situation, so we had decided to wait until our son was old enough for long-distance travel and move the whole family together. We finished relocating our base of living while keeping this move and job change hidden from Tim's parents until the very end. By the time a month had passed since our son was born, everything was over. Fortunately, our son grew up healthy in both mind and body, and no issues arose at all during the long-distance move. In the end, during the time it took for us to finish moving like that, his parents never showed up at our apartment. Several years have passed since then, but an opportunity to have contact with his parents has yet to come. Our son, who is now running around energetically, continues to grow up without even knowing of his grandparents' existence. At one point, I had a chance to talk with an acquaintance living near his parents' house, and they told me about the recent state of affairs around that factory. After we suddenly cut off contact, not only were they unable to see their grandson, but even their only son Tim avoided them, and apparently this caused both his parents to completely lose their energy. Perhaps because Dylan's vigor had declined, he was unable to turn around the factory's performance that had been on a downward trend, and he apparently decided on his own to shut it down. The factory that Dylan had been so eager to have Tim take over and even pass on to his grandchild no longer exists. The acquaintance had seen my mother-in-law Caddy out shopping a few times, but said she seemed lifeless. Eventually Caddy injured her leg and it impeded her mobility, and she apparently became unable to even do housework satisfactorily. Dylan, who had no life skills and had never even done his own laundry, was apparently seen by people many times wearing terribly dirty clothes. And now, it seems both that house and factory are deserted and have become completely vacant. This is just my guess, but I think the two of them, having lost their ability to live on their own, were probably taken into a facility for elderly support or something similar by the government. Of course, I have no intention of going out of my way to confirm their whereabouts. And we, the husband and wife who became ski resort managers, are working hard at our jobs every day in the dreamlike environment of working at the ski resort we love. Since it's an environment where we can visit my parents' home with just a little travel, we go back and forth and help each other out when needed. My parents come over all the time, making up various excuses because they want to see their grandson even when they don't really need help. Our son is very attached to my parents too and really looks forward to seeing them. Having frequently gone to the ski resort from the time he gained awareness, our son is naturally showing an interest in skiing. He's already imitating skiing form and making us and my parents smile. Once this child grows up enough to be able to ski, the day will surely come when we can all ski together as a family. I can hardly wait for that day to arrive.
I'm going to marry your sister. ATM is no longer needed.
I could hear the mocking laughter over the phone. But I didn't let out a surprised sound. I thought if I played into their hands, it would weaken my position. And by now, I had not an iota of love left for my husband, Zach.
Okay, brace yourself.
I replied calmly, but inside, anger was boiling over. Zach, who dumped all the childcare, elder care, and housework on me, was enjoying an affair with my sister, Nicole. And Nicole too, after borrowing all that money from me, she slept with my husband and even called me an ATM at the end. It was unforgivable.
You're okay with us divorcing, right?
When Zach pressed me, I simply nodded yes. On the other end of the phone, the two of them cheered. Enjoy it while you can. There's no way they won't get their comeuppance for belittling me like this. I bit my lip hard. My name is Maggie. I'm 60 years old, living with my husband Zach, who's 5 years my senior. Our son, Alan, is 30 this year, already independent and out of the house. I was working part-time at a grocery store until recently, but due to the recent surge in prices, I was forced into early retirement for cost-cutting. The manager, who was very kind since I worked there for many years, even gave me a severance package despite being part-time. It's a bit sad to retire before reaching the age of retirement, but working at the grocery store definitely helped me grow. So I'm very grateful to the manager who continued to employ me. One might think I'm set for a slow life in retirement, but actually, I'm having some domestic issues. Well, more with Zach than with the household. With our loveless and distant marriage, I'm very anxious about living together for many more years. Why did it come to this? Let me start from the beginning. I met Zach over 40 years ago. Back then, I was a student job hunting, talking to various industry veterans. Most of them were seniors from the newspaper club I was part of. At a club drinking party, many alumni, including Zach, would show up. Maggie, what kind of company do you want to work for? Zach, rumored to be the handsome senior in the club, asked me with a comfortable distance. I honestly told him I wanted to work for a stable company. How about the bank I work at? Banking's probably the most stable, right? Indeed, it seems like a solid job. While my response was cliché, I was happy Zach invited me to his bank. Encouraged by Zach, I applied to his bank and got the job. It wasn't too difficult as the bank hired many students from my university. Once I started working at the bank, I realized many women liked him. Zach, always invited out for meals after work, seemed out of reach for me. But Zach often asked me out, and despite feeling guilty towards his other admirers, I started going out with him more as I was interested. So, we started dating and got married 3 years later, after which I quit the bank. It's regretful to quit just after 4 years, but back then, most women quit upon marriage. Especially since Zach and I were in the same workplace, he seemed to prefer I work part-time elsewhere. I had no regrets about marrying Zach and quitting my job. For a while, we enjoyed our life together until I got pregnant and gave birth to our son, Alan, at 30. Zach, who used to treat me like a princess, suddenly became indifferent after the birth.
Zach, can you make a bottle for Alan?
A bottle? That's a mom's job. Why do I have to do it? His sudden change in attitude left me more in shock rather than in sadness or anger. I had heard that men sometimes lose interest when their wives give birth. But I thought that was a story for only a small fraction of couples. I never imagined that Zach, who loved me so much, would suddenly cast me aside like throwing something into the open sea after I had our child. From then on, every day was a whirlwind. Zach continued to refuse to help with the baby.
Taking care of the baby is a mom's job. Plus, you're a housewife, so it's natural for you to take care of it.
I'm busy with work. Zach had his plausible reasons, but they didn't satisfy me.
But it's my first time too, and raising the baby alone is hard work.
As I countered while watching Zach's reaction, he glared at me.
If it's that hard, why don't you go to my dad's?
Dad's free and can help you out.
To your father?
Yeah, that's right. I was utterly shocked by Zach's suggestion. Zach's mom had passed away early, and only his dad, Bob, was left, who recently had trouble with his legs and might need to go to a care facility. How could he think of leaving our child with Bob? Moreover, Zach completely refused to be involved with the baby, essentially just dumping it on his parents. Zach's outlandish idea left me troubled. Since then, I received little help from Zach in raising Alan, and I had to do it alone, repeatedly reading childcare books. Fortunately, Alan was a well-behaved and obedient child who listened to me and grew up healthy. When Alan turned 5, after sending him off to kindergarten, I noticed a call on my mobile phone.
Maggie, it looks like Dad collapsed. I'm thinking of putting him in a facility. Can you handle the paperwork?
What?
Collapsed? Is he okay? And about the facility?
I was very surprised by Zach's call. The news of Bob's collapse was alarming. I hoped he had been taken to the hospital in time. Given Bob's leg condition, it must have been quite a struggle. Bob had always been fond of me, treating me like his own daughter, and I regularly took Alan to visit him, even without Zach asking. The in-laws' house was about a 40-minute drive from our home. Every time we visited, "Thank you for coming all this way," Bob would say with a kind smile. Alan and I both loved Bob and, despite the distance, always wanted to visit him again and again. Hearing that Bob had collapsed, I was filled with anxiety, but Zach only mentioned putting him in a facility in a matter-of-fact tone, which irritated me.
Just handle it. I'm busy with work, okay? Wait a minute.
Zach cut the call quickly after saying his piece. The idea of putting Bob in a facility was unthinkable to me. Unless it was Bob's own wish, it seemed like Zach was just deciding to put him in a facility on his own. After much thought, I decided to take care of Bob myself as soon as he recovered. When I arrived at the hospital where Bob had been sent, he was in the hospital room and had already regained his consciousness. Bob was over 70 but had struggled to continue the family's farming business despite his leg issues. Both Zach and I had asked Bob to rest, but he insisted on going to the field that day.
Maggie, sorry for troubling you.
No, please, just don't strain yourself anymore.
All right.
It seemed Bob had learned his lesson this time and stopped going to the field after being discharged. Bob's field was no longer used for crops, leaving only an empty land. Though it could be revived with care, the land would probably be passed on to Zach, his only son, who I doubted would take up farming. I felt sorry for the neglected field but thought it was for the best if it meant Bob wouldn't strain himself further. After that, I started caring for Bob, visiting the in-laws' house about 3 times a week. I also began working part-time at the grocery store around that time, juggling work, childcare, caregiving, and household chores. For childcare, I switched Alan from kindergarten to daycare with extended hours, managing to make time. I worked 4 mornings a week till after lunch and then went to the in-laws' house. After caring for Bob, I would pick up Alan from daycare, go home, and make dinner. It was very challenging initially due to inexperience. Though it became slightly easier as I got used to it, I didn't realize how tired I was becoming. I had no time to talk to Zach and was overwhelmed just dealing with the tasks at hand. 10 years passed in this manner, and I turned 45, Zach 50. By then, Alan had become a teenager and often rebelled against me. But I saw this as a sign of his growing independence and, while feeling a bit lonely, I was happy about his growth. However, Alan never showed any defiance towards Zach. In fact, he hardly ever spoke to him. Zach had abandoned any childcare responsibilities from Alan's birth, leaving everything to me, so it seemed Alan didn't really think of Zach as his dad. It was around this time that our loveless and distant family relationship reached a critical point. The catalyst was a call from my sister, Nicole.
Hi, Maggie. I just got back from a trip to Hawaii with friends and I've got some souvenirs for you. Can I drop by your place?
Nicole, my elder sister by 3 years, has always been reckless with money and had a fiery temperament, making us quite incompatible. She always wore flashy makeup and was more beautiful than me. I was suspicious of her intention to give me souvenirs but couldn't refuse her kind gesture and agreed. When Nicole came over the weekend, she handed me the souvenirs, which I realized were not from Hawaii and were clearly common sweets available locally. I chose to stay silent, thinking that pointing this out would only upset her.
Hey, Maggie. I'm short on cash this month. Can you lend me some money?
Suddenly visiting with a fake souvenir and now this, I wondered what she was up to.
Lend you money. Why?
I suspected it was just Nicole's usual spending habits leaving her broke.
Well, I've been feeling unwell lately. The doctor said I might need to be hospitalized. But I don't have insurance and can't afford the hospital and treatment costs.
Nicole, sounding feeble, left me speechless. What kind of illness required hospitalization? I silently stared at Nicole, who looked at me pleadingly.
Okay. Just pay me back after your treatment. Thanks. Sisters are the best.
Nicole's face lit up as she shook my hand. Despite our differences, she was my sister and I wanted her to get well soon if she was ill. By the way, when is Zach getting back? Once Nicole knew I'd lent her the money, she casually asked this.
Zach just went to the grocery store.
Oh, I see. I'll just say hi then and leave. Right then, the front door opened and Zach returned. Hey, Zach. Oh, Nicole. You're here. Yes, just had something to discuss with Maggie. But I'm done now and will be leaving. As Nicole stood up and passed by Zach, she seemed to whisper something in his ear. After Nicole left.
What did Nicole say to you earlier?
I asked, but
nothing important.
Zach evaded the question. I remained curious but soon forgot about it. The discovery of Zach and Nicole's affair happened a month later. I planned to visit Bob that day, but work got extended, so I postponed my visit to the in-laws' house to the next day and went home as usual. Alan was at the library, so only Zach should have been home.
Why are there women's shoes here?
As I took off my shoes at the entrance, I noticed a familiar pair of heels. They were the high heels Nicole wore over the weekend. Entering the house, the living room was empty, which relieved me momentarily. But then, from the bedroom, I heard faint, indiscreet voices of Zach and Nicole.
What are they doing?
I considered confronting them right then, but hesitated at the last moment. What if Zach demands a divorce after being exposed? Alan wouldn't want to live with Zach. But I wasn't confident I could afford Alan's education fees alone. If we were to divorce, I wanted to wait until Alan had graduated from college. Frustrated, I decided to leave the house, pretending I saw nothing. Instead, I gathered evidence of the affair, taking photos of their traces and secretly saving the exchanges between Zach and Nicole from his mobile phone. It appeared they had been having an affair for about 6 months. Despite the anger boiling inside me, I reminded myself it was for Alan and endured, not exposing the affair. Another 15 years have passed since then, and Alan is now part of the working world. After graduating from college and leaving his first job early, Alan set up his own business and is now working hard as its president. And as the story goes, I had retired from the grocery store, but I was working a little at Alan's company. I had been giving Nicole money for her treatment bit by bit, but when her requests became too persistent, I grew reluctant to lend more and started ignoring her calls. In fact, the signs of Nicole and Zach's affair had disappeared about a year after it came to light. Zach probably got bored of Nicole. He changed his mind and chose to stay married to me. Knowing this, I couldn't bring myself to pursue the matter of the affair anymore and decided to pretend it never happened. But I realized my naivety when I heard about Bob's death. I got the news about Bob from Zach during the day. Bob had lived a long life until 95, but I was deeply shocked by the loss of Bob, who I had cared for so long. Bob, unlike Zach, was kind and considerate, so his passing felt like losing my own parent. Yet even then, Zach said,
"Dad seems to have accumulated a lot of wealth, so that's exciting."
Laughing. I was so angry that I thought of giving Zach a piece of my mind, but then I heard a woman's laughter from nearby. Oops, did she realize we're together? I was chilled to the bone at the sound of Nicole's voice. Had Nicole and Zach's relationship not ended after all? For 15 years, they had continued their affair without my knowledge. Realizing this, they seemed like an incomprehensible entity to me.
"I'm going to marry your sister."
ATM is no longer needed. I could hear the mocking laughter over the phone. But I didn't let out a sound of surprise. I thought if I played into their hands, it would weaken my position, and by now, I had not an iota of love left for Zach.
Okay, brace yourself.
I replied calmly, but inside, anger was boiling over. Zach, who dumped all the childcare, elder care, and housework on me, was enjoying an affair with Nicole. And Nicole too, after borrowing all that money from me, she slept with my husband and even called me an ATM at the end. It was unforgivable.
"You're okay with us divorcing, right?"
When Zach pressed me, I simply nodded yes.
On the other end of the phone, the two of them cheered. Enjoy it while you can. There's no way they won't get their comeuppance for belittling me like this. I bit my lip hard. After Bob's funeral, I filed for divorce as promised. When I informed Zach, he seemed so delighted that it felt like he was doing it on purpose.
"Now that we're divorced, you should leave this house as soon as possible."
"Me leave?" I asked, surprised, and Zach nodded as if it were obvious.
"I'm going to live with Nicole, and you'll be living alone. This house is too big for one person."
Anger turned to disbelief, and I said, "Okay." Too weary to argue, and agreed to Zach's demands. Though upset, I had already considered my living situation before the divorce. Leaving our home, I headed to Alan's, who was living independently. I had contacted Alan beforehand, and he welcomed his mom, who had just left Zach, with open arms. He's truly a kind son. I resolved to work even harder at Alan's company. A few days later, a man claiming to be a lawyer contacted me. When I went to the specified location, Zach, Nicole, and the lawyer were seated.
"I am in possession of a will left by Zach's dad,"
the lawyer said, and took out the will signed by Bob from his bag. I was surprised as I didn't know Bob had left a will. As Zach's only child, he was the legal heir to Bob's assets. Being no longer Zach's wife, I had no claim to any inheritance. Why was I called then? As I wondered, the lawyer read the will. Its contents were astounding. Bob had left half of his assets to me. That meant the field Bob owned was now part of my estate. While Zach would inherit the other half due to his legal share, he had surely not expected me to inherit anything.
"Why does Maggie get half of the inheritance?" I'm his only son. I should receive it all.
Dad was very grateful to Maggie for her selfless care, even though they were not related by blood. He meant it as a thank you. Bob.
I was deeply moved by Bob's thoughtfulness.
What the heck is this? I thought we could finally relax with the inheritance.
Nicole twisted her face in frustration. The lawyer then mentioned that Bob's will had also left all of his debts to Zach, but it seemed Zach and Nicole were too upset to hear that part. I was overwhelmed with gratitude towards Bob, and before I knew it, tears were streaming down my face.
Thank you, Bob.
Seeing me in tears, the two of them seemed to grow even angrier, but the lawyer concluded.
That is the content of the will.
With that, Zach and Nicole seemed to snap back to reality.
I'm not happy about losing half, but hey, we still have half of the inheritance left. Gotta thank the law for that. Zach said as he patted Nicole's shoulder, who nodded in agreement, right. Well, we'll be leaving now. We won't have anything to do with you anymore, so take care, they laughed loudly as they left.
I returned to Alan's house, savoring Bob's last act of kindness. After receiving the inheritance from Bob, I continued working at Alan's place without incident, and before I knew it, 2 months had passed. That's when Zach called me, on a Sunday. Alan and I were both off work, relaxing at home, but my mobile phone started ringing insistently.
Zach!
The air froze between me and Alan as we realized it was Zach calling.
Why is Dad calling? He abandoned you, and now what does he want? You don't have to answer.
Alan said so, but the phone kept ringing persistently. Irritated, I decided to answer to silence Zach.
What is it, calling me repeatedly? You said we wouldn't have anything to do with each other ever again.
I answered with a tone of annoyance, but Zach seemed not to hear me and started talking frantically.
Hey, what's going on? Why are you working at Alan's company? And why is Alan's company being featured on TV? And what's with showing your fancy house?
Zach's near hysterical voice echoed through the phone, causing Alan to frown.
You saw the TV.
I realized why Zach was calling all of a sudden. Recently, a TV station had interviewed Zach's gym, and it was broadcast yesterday. Alan's gym, which combines a gym and cafe, had caught the TV station's interest due to its novelty. Since opening, the gym had rapidly increased its membership, and Alan appeared on TV as a successful young entrepreneur, even showcasing our home as Zach mentioned. The house we live in now, Alan's home, is quite luxurious, far surpassing the neighboring houses in size. So Zach saw Alan's house and was shocked enough to call.
What do you mean you guys are living in such a big house? Over here, Nicole used up all of Dad's inheritance, and I even got left with his debts. Damn it, I didn't hear about that from the lawyer back then.
Zach yelled angrily over the phone. But back then, the lawyer did mention that Bob had left all his debts to Zach. It wasn't my fault that Zach had not listened, and it was none of my business.
It's none of my business, Zach. The lawyer clearly mentioned it, and it's your responsibility for not paying attention. Besides, you knew about Nicole's spending habits even before marrying her, right? I gave her money for treatment and haven't been repaid yet. This just proves to me that you and Nicole are the worst kind of people, quick to betray someone you should trust.
In response to my correct argument, Zach remained silent, unable to say anything.
Besides, isn't it all your fault for cheating on me in the first place? I just don't understand why I have to be blamed.
I let out my pent-up frustrations, feeling somewhat relieved. Realizing he couldn't blame me, Zach suddenly changed his tone to a pleading one.
Please, Maggie. I'm begging you, lend me some money. I was supposed to get a retirement fund this year, but I got fired, and all I'm left with are Dad's debts. Nicole left after we argued about money. How am I supposed to live now? You're my only hope. I admit I was wrong about everything. I apologize. Just give me a little bit of Dad's inheritance. You're living a good life with Alan, right? Think of it as helping someone out, okay?
His nerve to beg his ex-wife for money after cheating and leaving her was beyond comprehension. Alan, who had been listening to the conversation, looked at me, seemingly wanting to say something. I handed my mobile phone to Alan. Alan turned on the speaker and firmly said to Zach,
Dad, you betrayed Mom and married Nicole, right? And I heard you never took care of me since I was born. I don't have any memories of playing with you after I became aware. It was always just Mom and me. On Parents' Day and Sports Day, it was always just Mom who came. That's why I'm helping Mom with my company and living with her. Why should I, who you never did anything for, lend you money? My only parent is Mom. I won't give you a single dollar.
Alan's strong, businesslike tone choked me up. I could sense Zach gasping on the other end of the phone.
Alan, how could you say that to your dad? Fine, I won't rely on you guys ever again. Don't insult me.
With that, Zach hung up. We looked at the silent mobile phone and then burst out laughing together.
Zach begged us for money, and now he says he won't have anything to do with us. What an idiot. Yeah. Dad has always been like that, getting angry without thinking ahead.
As we discussed Zach's foolishness, the phone rang again. It was Zach. He probably wanted to ask for money despite saying he wouldn't contact us again. Fed up, I blocked Zach's contact.
That's it. Now that fool can't bother us anymore. Yeah. Thanks, Mom.
His gratitude for being raised seemed implicit.
I should be the one thanking you. You've given me such a great life. No matter how old you get, you're still my precious son.
We reaffirmed our bond as mother and son, grateful for each other's presence in our spacious home. A few days later, my sister Nicole called me. Her request was almost identical to what Zach had said. I couldn't fathom lending more money to Nicole, who hadn't even repaid what she owed me. In fact, I hadn't yet demanded compensation for her affair with Zach, so I successfully sued both of them for damages through a lawyer. They ended up getting divorced after being married. Their marriage only lasted for 2 months. Zach was even worse off than Nicole. The negative inheritance he received from Dad was too substantial. Bob had borrowed a lot of money for farming, managing it all by himself. I hadn't known about it. While caring for Bob, he often complained about Zach. Bob was able to forgive Zach for not taking over the farming business, but the fact that he didn't take care of Alan and not visit his own father was unforgivable. He was also furious with the way Zach treated me, and I always tried to soothe him, saying it was okay. If kind Bob was that angry, Zach must have been quite a negligent son. All of Zach's expected retirement funds were gone due to his dismissal for misconduct. Rumor has it he even tried to embezzle money from his bank to pay off his debts. Had he just worked quietly until the end, he would have received his retirement money. His greed was his downfall. Now, while receiving a pension, he seems to be working 3 part-time jobs to pay off his debts. Starting a new job at 65 and being taught by younger people as a newcomer must be shattering his pride. Although he has worked as a bank employee for many years, his part-time job as a new employee involves a lot of odd jobs. A hard adjustment for someone who never did housework, childcare, or elder care. He'll likely give up soon enough. For Zach, who neglected his son and cheated with Nicole for years, it's a fitting punishment. I hope he manages until the end. As for me, I'm still working energetically at Alan's workplace. The staff, who are around my child's age, treat me very kindly. Our workplace is always full of smiles, attracting many customers. Alan recently got engaged to a girl a year younger than him and introduced her to me. She's a wonderful, sensible young lady. Well respected at work. I was planning to move out when they married, but she insisted we live together. I'm grateful for her kindness and looking forward to our future together.
I really need to talk to Lynn about something.
Emily, my daughter-in-law, seems to hesitate for a moment, taking a deep breath. But then, as if she's made up her mind, she starts to speak with determination.
I'm sorry, but I just can't do it anymore. I can't afford to pay $3,000 every month for Brian's care. It's just too much for me.
She said this through tears. I couldn't understand what Emily was talking about.
Paying $3,000 a month for care? What are you talking about? Brian passed away 8 years ago. You should know that.
What? But Ridley said we needed money for the care. I wasn't told he passed away. I don't understand what's happening.
Emily seemed genuinely unaware. Even I am struggling to grasp the situation, but it's an undeniable fact that my husband Brian has passed away.
I really wasn't told about his passing. It's the truth.
Emily was desperately trying to make her case. Based on Emily's behavior up until now, I was convinced she wasn't lying, and I knew she wasn't the type to make up such a story.
About 6 months ago, Ridley came to me saying we needed money for Brian's care. He said our parents had sent us a lot of money during our student days, and now it was his turn to send money.
Hearing Emily's frail voice, I felt a rage like never before. I could easily imagine how troubled Emily had been. I was convinced that my son Ridley was lying. Given the circumstances, there was no doubt about it. I could forgive a lot, but not telling his wife about Brian's death and asking her for money was unforgivable. I had to make Ridley reflect on his actions. Otherwise, I wouldn't know what to say to Brian in heaven. I made up my mind and approached Emily with a proposal.
Listen, we're going to gather evidence of Ridley's wrongdoing together. We'll make sure he can't make any excuses. Then, we'll confront him with it.
My name is Lynn. After graduating from nursing school, I started working at a state public hospital. The job was tough, but it's where I had a fateful encounter with Brian. He initially came to my hospital as a patient, and I was assigned to be his nurse. During his care, he shared many stories with me. I was somewhat intrigued by him, so I often engaged in our conversations. The conversations we shared during those tough days at work became my greatest joy. And then, when he was about to be discharged, he gave me his contact information. Let's get in touch if you'd like. I didn't hesitate to contact him immediately. And so, we started dating officially. I later learned that he had fallen for me at first sight, and was desperately trying to get my attention by striking up conversations. I came to deeply love him for that. Our relationship continued without any major fights because he was such a kind person. And eventually, we got married. Even after marriage, my relationship with Brian was just fine. And a few years later, our son Ridley was born. From that time, Brian became busy with work and was rarely at home. But when the family was together, we would happily go out to eat or travel. Several more years passed, and Ridley went on to college. His college was quite far from home, reachable only by airplane. I felt a sense of vulnerability sending my son so far away, but convinced myself it was for his future. Ridley would come home during long holidays, and he seemed even brighter than before, which reassured me. However, being a STEM college, the expenses seemed to be quite high. Ridley often asked me to send him money.
Mom, I'm sorry, but I'm short on money this month. Can you send me some? Didn't I just send you some recently? What are you spending all this money on? It's for school stuff. The books they require us to buy are all specialized and really expensive. Plus, the equipment and materials for research cost quite a bit too.
Ridley pleaded desperately.
And there's also living expenses. It's really tough, even with a part-time job. I can't keep up.
Ridley said, sounding almost on the verge of tears. Hearing his voice made my heart ache. I wondered how anxious Ridley must be, living so far from home. Our own financial situation wasn't easy, but I felt compelled to help no matter what.
Okay, I understand. I'll send it by the end of this week, so don't worry.
Thank you, Mom.
Ridley's voice brightened up upon hearing my response, filling me with an indescribable joy. This exchange continued until Ridley graduated from college. After graduation, Ridley successfully found a job in a company in the city. I wished he could come back to his hometown, but it couldn't be helped. The university was a plane ride away, but now he was just a long train ride away. It was somewhat closer, so I had to be content with that. However, Ridley became busier with work and visited home even less.
Ridley, when will you come home next? Let me know when you decided. Sorry, Mom. Work's been so hectic, I don't see myself coming home anytime soon. It's like I hardly have any days off, and sometimes my boss calls me in unexpectedly. So, I really can't afford to come home.
It sounds tough. It's good to work hard, but don't overdo it. If you break down, it's all for nothing. Make sure to reach out if things get too hard.
Yeah, I got it. Thanks.
Ridley said this and quickly hung up the phone. His somewhat indifferent attitude pained me. But I told myself it couldn't be helped. Ridley was a grown adult, after all. It was probably overbearing for me to say too much now. I tried to suppress my loneliness and convinced myself of this. I also made a point not to call Ridley. I didn't want to interrupt his work. For a while, we didn't communicate. But then, one day, Ridley called me out of the blue.
Lynn, it's been a while. Is now a good time? It's fine. What's going on?
Well, I've decided to get married.
What? What do you mean?
I happened to meet someone and we got along well. So, we decided to get married. I've already met her parents. We'll be coming home soon to introduce her to you.
I see. I'll be looking forward to it.
I said this and hung up the phone. Ridley was getting married. And just the thought made my heart flutter. I wondered what kind of woman she could be. Would I be able to see my grandchildren? All sorts of thoughts raced through my mind. I was so happy that I marked the calendar with a big sign. And then the day finally came. Ridley's girlfriend, named Emily, was a quiet, beautiful, and kind-hearted woman with a sharp mind. I liked her immediately. She seemed perfect for Ridley. There was no reason to oppose their marriage, and things moved quickly. Ridley and Emily were soon happily married. After the wedding, Emily would help me with my work whenever Ridley was home. It seemed that Emily thought highly of me too, and there was no sign of any mother-in-law and daughter-in-law conflict. However, as time passed, Ridley became busier and had almost no time to come home. Even though we would occasionally talk on the phone, those calls became rare. I was lonely, but I guessed young people preferred spending time with each other. Out of consideration for Ridley and his wife, I decided not to call unless it was an emergency. After that, we hardly communicated. There was no interaction after they called to wish me a happy birthday, and time passed by. But a year later, Emily suddenly called.
Lynn, it's been a while.
Emily spoke in a heavy, somber tone. I was concerned by her demeanor, but chose not to press the issue. Oh, Emily, it's been a while. How's Ridley doing?
Yes, he's fine. But there's something I just have to tell you.
Something you have to say? What happened? Emily seemed to hesitate for a moment, taking a deep breath. But then, as if she had made up her mind, she began to speak earnestly.
I'm sorry, but I just can't do it anymore. I can't afford to pay $3,000 every month for Brian's care. It's just too much for me.
Emily said this through tears. I couldn't grasp what Emily was saying.
$3,000 a month for care? What are you talking about?
Please don't joke about this.
But how can there be care expenses? Brian passed away 8 years ago. You should know that, shouldn't you?
What? But Ridley told me we needed money for care. I haven't heard anything about him passing away. What's going on here? I'm completely lost. Emily seemed genuinely unaware. I was having trouble understanding the situation myself. But there's no denying the fact that Brian has passed away.
Listen, Emily, Brian passed away 8 years ago due to his illness worsening. He was indeed in need of care before that.
I said this carefully, trying not to upset Emily.
I did tell Ridley about how tough Brian's care was. But I never asked for money.
I can't believe it. I wasn't told anything about his passing. It's true.
Emily pleaded desperately. I was convinced she wasn't lying, based on her behavior up to now. I knew she wasn't the type to say such things. I recalled the time when Brian passed away and explained it to Emily in as much detail as possible.
When Brian was critically ill, and it was clear he was in danger, I contacted Ridley. He came home then.
Emily gasped over the phone. She might not have known even that.
But you didn't come. I heard you were busy with an overseas business trip and couldn't possibly come back here,
I said, feeling a pang in my heart. But at that time, I was so preoccupied with Brian that I didn't have the capacity to consider Emily's situation.
Overseas business trip? I'm an office worker. I don't go on trips abroad. In fact, I've never been on a business trip.
Emily exclaimed, seemingly shocked.
Why would Ridley say such a thing? Where did all the care money I've been paying go?
Emily was clearly shaken over the phone. But after a while, she began to explain the situation slowly.
This started about 6 months ago. Ridley came to me saying we needed money for Brian's care. He mentioned how our parents sent us money during our student days, and now it was his turn to send money.
Hearing Emily's frail voice, I felt an unprecedented wave of anger.
So, I initially paid willingly. But the amount kept increasing, and now it's $3,000 a month.
Emily sighed deeply after saying that. And I could easily imagine how much she had been struggling.
I've been dipping into my savings to make the payments, but honestly, I've reached my limit. That's why I called.
Hearing Emily's words, I was convinced that Ridley was lying. The situation made it clear. Forgiving minor things is one thing, but not telling his wife about Brian's death and asking for money is unforgivable. If this demand escalates, it could even lead to a criminal case. I must make Ridley reflect on his actions. Otherwise, I wouldn't know what to say to Brian in heaven. I resolved to do something and approached Emily with a suggestion.
Emily, I believe you. It's clear Ridley is lying.
Is that so? I was foolish. If only I had spoken to you sooner, this wouldn't have happened.
No, it's not your fault. But we can't let this go. Listen, let's gather evidence of Ridley's wrongdoing together. We'll collect enough so he can't make any excuses, and then we'll confront him with it.
Understood. What should I do?
Well, Emily, I'd like you to gather any evidence you can find at home. Do you have a study or something? There should be receipts and documents there.
I'll hire a detective agency to investigate Ridley's background. There's probably more to this.
Got it. I'll carefully collect evidence without being noticed and look through messages to see if there's any information about Ridley. I'll contact you if I find anything.
Emily said this and then hung up the phone. At first, she was unsettled, but now there wasn't a trace of that to be seen. With that attitude, he's bound to thoroughly search for evidence. I started looking online for a detective agency and immediately requested an investigation into Ridley's background. Several weeks later, I visited Ridley's house. I had asked Emily about Ridley's day off in advance. Guided by Emily, I headed towards the living room. Unaware of anything, Ridley was relaxing in the living room. He was surprised to see me enter.
What? Mom, what brings you here all of a sudden? You could have let me know you were coming.
Sorry for not telling you in advance. I just needed to talk to you about something.
I see. But I have to step out for a bit. Emily will fill you in on the details.
It seemed Ridley sensed something was off. He suddenly got up in a hurry, looking to leave the scene.
Sit down,
I yelled at Ridley. He looked surprised and flustered. Emily, with a blank expression, went over to Ridley and made him sit on the sofa. Ridley looked back and forth between me and Emily, his face clearly showing his distress.
You know, Ridley, I got a call from Emily the other day. She told me you've been making her pay $3,000 a month for Brian's care expenses.
Upon hearing this, Ridley's expression twisted, and he bit his lip, realizing his actions had been discovered.
But that's strange, isn't it? Because Brian is no longer with us. So, who exactly are these care expenses for? I'd like to hear it from you.
Ridley didn't answer right away. He looked down and scratched his head.
Not going to answer? Then let's change the question. Emily didn't know that Brian had passed away.
Emily looked down at Ridley with cold eyes.
You said she couldn't come because she was on a business trip abroad, right? But Emily has never been on a business trip, let alone abroad. What do you have to say about that?
Ridley remained silent, still looking down.
Say something,
I shouted even louder than before. I was furious at Ridley for choosing to remain silent at such a time. Emily's lips were pressed tightly together as she glared at Ridley. Ridley sighed deeply and rubbed his face with his hands.
Listen, we already know you've been lying. We've gathered plenty of evidence to prove it. So, staying silent now is pointless.
I said this in a more admonishing tone. Scolding him wouldn't make him reflect. I wanted him to understand why what he did was wrong.
Now, about the $3,000 you conned out of Emily. What did you use it for? Tell me the truth.
Ridley was silent for a while, but eventually, he began to speak weakly.
I wanted to use that money to start a business. My current job is so tough. I thought starting my own business would increase my income and allow me to work more freely.
Ridley murmured, clearly shaken. I wanted to immediately rebut, but I decided to let him finish speaking first.
I know I did something wrong to you guys. But I thought you'd be against it if I told you the truth, so I couldn't bring myself to say it. I'm really sorry.
After saying this, Ridley got up from the sofa and apologized.
Well, I appreciate your honesty.
Look at me, I said gently. Ridley, seemingly relieved, looked up, but he was met with documents and photos I dropped in front of him. They were the detective's report and documents Emily had found at home. Upon seeing them, Ridley's face turned pale.
It seems you've been borrowing money from various places since your college days. And despite that, you've been splurging on girls at bars. You've been living quite lavishly, haven't you?
And that's not all. You even took out loans in my name.
Emily said this and shoved the documents in Ridley's face.
I had no idea about any of this. You're dissatisfied with just $3,000 a month? Am I just someone convenient for you to get money from? Say something.
Emily seemed to have reached her limit, grabbing Ridley by the collar in frustration. Enough, Ridley.
As I said earlier, we know all about your lies, and we have all the evidence we need.
I stopped Emily and explained again to Ridley, who, frightened by Emily's scolding, listened quietly.
We know how you've been spending your money and what your personal life is like. There's no use hiding anything now.
Ridley groaned softly, ruffling his hair. But I continued undeterred.
We want to hear everything from you. Understand?
So, start talking. This time, Ridley seemed genuinely remorseful. He began to speak through tears.
I'm sorry, truly sorry. It was all a lie.
Tears fell from Ridley's eyes, forming puddles on the floor.
Back in college, I asked for money not for textbooks, but because I wanted money to have fun. I didn't have a part-time job. I spent all the money on shopping and hanging out with friends.
Hearing Ridley finally tell the truth brought me some relief.
And what about after you started working? After I started working, I went to bars after work. I took a liking to one of the girls there and ended up spending a lot of money on her. If I didn't, she wouldn't pay me any attention.
But you've been spending more than you earn, haven't you? How did you manage that?
By the time I realized I couldn't borrow money in my name anymore. But I still had to pay back my debts. So, I started borrowing money in Emily's name. I secretly took her ID and completed the procedures online.
Emily looked like she wanted to say something upon hearing this. But I gestured for her to wait. I had decided we would only interject after he had confessed everything.
I had no other choice. But when that wasn't an option anymore, I lied about needing money for care expenses to get it from Emily. I'm really sorry.
Ridley broke down in tears like a child after saying this. But the ones who truly deserved to cry were Emily and me. I exchanged a look with Emily and sighed deeply. Emily seemed to have lost the will to scold him any further at the sight of Ridley's pathetic state. After sobbing for a while, Ridley apologized again.
I'm truly sorry. I deeply regret my actions and promise I won't do it again. I swear it right here. I'll definitely pay back the money. Please forgive me.
Ridley apologized sincerely. But his words were hard to trust. He had been deceiving those close to him for so long. Even if we forgave him, it was almost certain he would just repeat his actions.
Ridley, it's over. We can't trust anything you say. We never intended to forgive you. And this isn't the end. Be prepared.
An hour later, the doorbell of the house rang. Emily went to answer it. Ridley watched her apprehensively. Led in by Emily, the newcomers were women. Upon seeing their faces, Ridley caught his breath.
You recognize these women, Ridley. They're your ex-girlfriends. Don't pretend you've forgotten. You've been living off these women, haven't you?
Emily glared at Ridley as she spoke coldly.
Why? Why are all of you here? We found out you were living off these women thanks to Lynn's investigation. So I reached out to them, saying I wanted to apologize from the bottom of my heart.
Upon seeing their faces, Ridley caught his breath. Despair appeared in Ridley's eyes. Then, word spread.
Thanks to that, your ex-girlfriends have come together, wanting to support me. Please, express all the feelings you've been holding inside.
Emily's words were the signal for the start. One by one, Ridley's ex-girlfriends began to reveal his misdeeds. Ridley's face turned red from the overwhelming revelations, enduring the embarrassment. I, too, felt a deep sense of shame listening to it all, wondering where I went wrong in raising my son, and how he ended up in this situation. The exposure made me wish I could disappear from the sheer embarrassment. After the revelations, Emily placed divorce papers on the table. Ridley, I can't live with you anymore. Please sign these divorce papers right now. And write a promissory note to pay compensation and repay the loans you took out in my name. No, please, Emily, let's be rational about this. This isn't right. I'll truly change, so please reconsider. I'd be lost without you right now. Ridley pleaded pitifully, but his ex-girlfriends unanimously scolded him to get real. Not a single person in the room was on Ridley's side. Reluctantly, Ridley signed the divorce papers and wrote a promissory note and affidavit complying with Emily's demands. Afterward, Ridley, now in tears, turned to me, begging for help. Mom, I'm really sorry. This is my last selfish request. Please help me with the repayments. I know I've done wrong by lying, but I can't do this alone. Please.
Lynn, you don't need to help him. Just leave him be.
I looked into Ridley's eyes, reminiscing about the warmth of holding him for the first time. The warmth of holding Ridley for the first time, the joyful days spent with Brian and the three of us, the sense of vulnerability when sending Ridley off to college. It all comes back to me as if it were just yesterday. Despite his faults, he was still my son. All right, Ridley. No matter what you've done, you're my irreplaceable son. Ridley's eyes lit up with joy at my words. I don't believe I'm entirely blameless. Perhaps I made you feel lonely without realizing it. I was overwhelmed with remorse towards Ridley.
So, I'll take responsibility too. I promise to take care of you until the end.
Thank you, Mom.
Thank you so much. Ridley held my hands, apologizing through his tears. Just then, the doorbell rang again, and Emily went to answer it. Several well-dressed, stout men entered the living room.
Good afternoon. We are here following a request. Is this gentleman Ridley?
One of the men confirmed in a low voice.
Yes, that's him. We've finished our discussion, so please take him now.
Understood. The men briefly responded, then lifted Ridley by his arms and made him stand. Caught off guard, Ridley screamed and resisted, but he was no match for the men's strength.
Mom, who are these people? What do you mean they're taking me? Stop. Let me go.
I do want to help you get back on your feet, but I'm getting older and that's becoming difficult. So, I consulted with the detective agency, and they recommended a good rehabilitation facility.
I paused there. My heart was aching as if it were being torn apart. Ridley looked at me with tears in his eyes. With determination, I met his gaze and declared,
You're going there to be re-educated and fix your rotten self. This is my final act of sympathy for you.
This can't be happening. Let me go. Please, Emily, anyone, help me.
Ridley desperately pleaded for help, but Emily and his ex-girlfriends remained unmoved, watching him with cold eyes. It's a safe place, not dangerous. You'll just have your daily life and work managed while living there. If you truly are sorry, you'll follow their guidance, won't you?
No, I don't want this. I swear, I really won't do anything bad again. Please help me.
Ridley struggled as he was taken away. That's when I finally shed tears. I didn't want to do this. But the issue was too significant. If not rehabilitated now, Ridley could bring misery not only upon himself but also upon many others. I'm so sorry, Ridley. I apologized from the bottom of my heart. Emily came over and comforted me. There were tears in her eyes as well. Sending Ridley to the facility resolved everything for the moment. The debts Ridley had accumulated on his own would now be his responsibility to repay. So far, he has been making regular monthly payments into Emily's account without issue, as the total amount was too large for a lump sum payment. It will undoubtedly take a long time before Ridley has repaid everything. This is all a matter of personal responsibility. I've been able to keep up with Ridley's situation through occasional updates from the facility staff. Initially, it seems Ridley attempted to escape whenever he saw an opportunity. However, the dedicated efforts of the facility's staff in educating him have led to him now leading a quiet life, following the daily routine. I can only hope that he truly reforms from the bottom of his heart. Emily has been living alone since then. Fortunately, her salary is sufficient, so she doesn't seem to be struggling financially. I deeply regret what happened and feel truly sorry for Emily. She might have faced significant life disruptions due to debts she had no part in. Just thinking about it makes me feel like I can never apologize enough to Emily. However, Emily doesn't seem to hold anything against me. In her view, Ridley is the one at fault, not me. Moreover, Emily still visits my home every few months, mainly for sightseeing purposes. The main focus, it seems, is on tourism. Every time they visit, they bring various gifts, share stories, and help with household chores. Even though our official in-law relationship has ended, our bond feels closer than ever. After Brian's passing and sending Ridley to the facility, Emily's visits have become a significant source of joy for me. Now, I look forward to her visits and live a peaceful life on my own. Michael's baby turned 1 month old, and a celebration was planned. I was invited to Regina's parents' home.
How adorable! Just like an angel.
The moment I reached out to the baby's tiny fist, Regina shouted,
"Don't touch the baby if you're a stranger."
I withdrew my hand in surprise and protested. I'm Michael's mother. I'm the grandma of this child. So? Regina smiled mischievously. To me, you're a stranger. You're just someone unnecessary once I've gotten the congratulatory money. That's terrible.
You're stingy, just like your deli. It doesn't seem like we'll need anything from you in the future. So, this is where our relationship ends. Don't show your gloomy face around us again. We don't want your poverty rubbing off on our family.
I was momentarily taken aback, but quickly responded with a smile.
All right then.
Leaving me at the entrance, Regina went back inside. In my heart, I declared war. If that's the attitude you're going to take, I have my plans too. You'll regret this later. I am Margaret, a 55-year-old housewife. Shortly after my eldest son, Michael, started elementary school, I lost my husband. Determined to support Michael through college, I decided to work harder. I quit my part-time job and, using the money my husband had left, started a small delicatessen. Thanks to working tirelessly every day, the deli gradually became successful. And I was able to send Michael to college. When Michael was a child, I was too busy with daily life. We hardly ever had the luxury to go to theme parks or play in the park on weekends like other families. I felt guilty for not being able to give him more attention, fearing I was a failure as a parent. But Michael grew up to be a compassionate person, which relieved me. Michael, who landed a job at a big company, moved out to live on his own. Though he lived in the city, he would come to visit with a bright smile during long weekends. When he got used to his job, he called me one day saying, "There's someone I want you to meet," which excited me. However, I felt anxious as well as happy when Michael brought the young lady home. She was the daughter of the well-known Tucker Industries. I was nervous, thinking it was about making Michael a successor. But it turned out her cousin was set to take over and was already the vice president. Michael's wife, Regina, graduated from a university that only heiresses attend and is currently practicing to be a housewife at her parents' home. "Nice to meet you. Let's get along well, Margaret." The first time we met, she grabbed my hand and vigorously shook it. I could tell she was well-bred from her dining manners and behavior. But her unrestrained and flashy personality made me feel we wouldn't get along. But since Michael chose her, I wanted to get along well. I decided to make an effort to become closer. However, my feelings were quickly trampled upon after they got married. Regina was chatty and had a bright personality. That sounds nice, but her conversations revolved around neighborhood gossip, celebrity news, and speaking ill of acquaintances. The biggest issue was the timing of her visits. She would show up unannounced right when I got back from work and started preparing dinner. Naturally, I ended up inviting her to eat. I don't have any morning sickness at all. I can eat anything. Beer's okay too.
You shouldn't drink alcohol if you're pregnant. Really? Is that so?
Regina's surprised look made me anxious. When she told me she was pregnant, I was as happy as if it were my own news. But Regina seemed to lack awareness as a pregnant woman or had little prior knowledge. And despite claiming she could eat anything, her likes and dislikes were strong. She disliked fish for being too fishy and would only eat meat from certain brands. For dessert after dinner, she wanted expensive fruits like Japanese shine muscat grapes and muskmelons. Moreover, she had a habit of rating the meals after eating.
65 points. Not great.
93 points, could use more spice.
Today is 100 points. Amazing, you passed. Congratulations.
I forced a smile at her full-faced grin. "Regina, why do you rate every meal?" she said with a broad smile. "I'm doing you a favor, practicing. If you can't satisfy your daughter-in-law, your deli might as well shut down."
"I've been running it for 20 years in downtown, you know."
My sarcasm didn't land.
"It only takes a moment to go under. I wouldn't want to take care of an unemployed Margaret. So, you better work hard."
I'm only 55, yet she treats me like an old lady. Though she seems well-meaning, her constant superior attitude and offensive remarks are infuriating. Having these exchanges 4 or 5 times a week is exhausting. And using her pregnancy as an excuse, she won't even clear the table after eating. Lounging on the sofa with her phone instead. She wouldn't budge, so when I tried to relax with a beer and TV, she complained.
"Margaret, that's terrible. Drinking in front of me, is this harassment? Go to your room. I just want to enjoy a drink while watching TV dramas."
"Why don't you watch on your mobile phone? You're so inconsiderate." "I want to watch on a big screen, not a tiny one. And why do I have to take this from my daughter-in-law?" When my irritation reached its peak, Regina packs up Michael's share of dinner, smiles, and leaves. Exhausted, I bathe early and head to bed. Casually asking how they manage weekend dinners, she unabashedly says they use delivery. Deli items, or ready meals.
"I'm not good at housework. But I want Michael to eat delicious meals. It would really help if Margaret could prepare weekend dinners too."
I ignored her audacious request.
I'm happy Regina comes to visit, but I'm also tired from work. Maybe just once a week would be better?
When I couldn't take it anymore and complained to Michael over the phone, this was his response.
Regina's morning sickness is really bad, and she can't do anything at home. I'm swamped with overtime, so I can only help out with the chores on weekends. She's lying down all the time at your place, right?
Having Mom watch over Regina makes me feel relieved. It's her first pregnancy, so she's probably anxious. Please overlook her rudeness.
All right, I understand.
It seems Regina plays the role of a frail pregnant woman in front of Michael. I strongly wanted to show him how she lies on the sofa, laughing while watching videos. But doing so would disappoint kind-hearted Michael and make him feel guilty towards me. Regina is taking advantage of me, knowing I wouldn't do such a thing. That part again irritates me. Though I'm not fond of Regina, I'm looking forward to meeting my grandchild and want to maintain a good relationship with Michael as before. So, I decided not to meddle too much and warmly watch over Michael and his family. I shouldn't impose my opinions on naming the grandchild or insist on living together because he's the eldest son. Instead, when Regina asked, I helped with buying baby supplies, accompanied her to prenatal checkups, and even to church to pray, serving as a dedicated bag carrier. As a grandma, I was eager to help in any way possible. But Regina's attitude grew increasingly overbearing. Lately, she even orders large furniture to be delivered to our home, right in front of me.
Margaret, what do you think of this? It's expensive.
Shall I buy it for you? Offering to buy it was my downfall. After that, she started asking for expensive baby items one after another.
Imported items are more stylish, right? It would be really nice to have a matching set. Regina, why not rent items that are only used for a short period? There are affordable and durable domestic brands too.
I couldn't help but suggest, and Regina glared at me sharply.
Margaret, don't you want to give your grandchild the best?
There's no end to luxury. So, you just don't want to spend the money, huh? Oh, how dreadful. Dad or Mom would easily shell out $100,000.
I thought, why not ask your dad or mom then? But it seems she has no intention of relying on her parents.
Margaret, you can't take your money to the grave. Let's spend it generously without being stingy.
Her words were so rude that I was at a loss for words. I felt my face heat up with anger, and I almost yelled back, "Mind your own business." No, that's not right. Causing a scene would put Michael in a difficult position, which would be unfair to him. Struggling to control my anger, I tried to speak calmly.
Anyway, let's use rental services for things we can. Savings have their limits.
All right, I understand.
Regina reluctantly agreed, though she seemed dissatisfied. My relief was short-lived when Michael called me in the evening.
Regina was asking Mom for various baby items? Yes, well.
Sorry. I thought she was buying them with the money I've been giving her. I was surprised when I saw the sudden increase in high-brand baby clothes and toys.
I could tell Michael was confused over the phone.
Did she make you spend a lot? Should I pay you back?
No, it's fine. I was planning to buy her some things anyway. Really sorry. Regina wanted a girl, and when we found out at the hospital, she got carried away.
I thought it was more than just getting carried away, but I refrained from speaking ill of Regina and stopped arguing. It's nice that it's a girl as she wanted.
Being a lady, she just has a different sense of money from us. But I don't think she means any harm. I'll tell her not to burden Mom anymore.
Please do. After hanging up, I sighed. I understand the desire to gather cute baby items. Still, it would be common sense to show a little restraint. After that, Michael must have talked to her because Regina stopped asking for expensive baby items altogether. I wished she would stop coming altogether, but Regina kept showing up as if nothing happened. Lately, she seemed to have shifted her strategy to asking for small amounts of money. Thinking if not large sums, then small ones might work.
Look, I can't work because I'm pregnant, so I have no money. But I'm scared Michael will lose interest if I don't keep up appearances. It's okay for someone old like Margaret, but I'm young and want to be loved.
Of course, I had no intention of giving her a penny.
Why don't you ask Michael for more allowance? He'd listen, right?
I can't do that. It would sound like I'm blaming his salary. Regina pouted, snacking on some treats. Being a manager at a major company at 30, he earns more than most of his peers. But my dad earns more. Oh, sorry. The words "then ask your dad" almost slipped out, but I held back with all my might. Regina always carried a high-brand bag and wore well-tailored maternity wear. Wanting more despite getting a hefty allowance seemed too selfish. It's not that I think pregnant women shouldn't dress well or housewives should look shabby. But begging your mother-in-law for money is definitely wrong. Though I was upset, looking at Regina's swollen belly calmed my anger. Soon, I'll meet the baby. The thought of becoming a grandma soon tickles me. In that aspect, I'm thankful to Regina. When my sister-in-law, Chelsea, came over the weekend and I vented to her, she was outraged.
The worst daughter-in-law ever. She's taking advantage of you too much. Michael should speak up.
Do you think so? I smiled at Chelsea's indignation. But I think once the baby is born, her rude behavior towards me will get better.
It's not just maternity blues, it's her character. Don't get your hopes up.
Maybe. But I get along with Michael, and I don't want to ruin their marriage. Chelsea sighed in frustration.
Don't keep it all to yourself. I'm here to listen to your complaints anytime.
Thanks, Chelsea. I smiled at Chelsea. For now, let's just pray that the baby is born safely. Eventually, Regina gave birth without any issues. I wanted to meet the baby, but since she went straight to her parents' house after being discharged, I decided to wait until Regina was feeling better. Michael, stopping by Regina's parents' house after work, sends me pictures of the baby daily. I can only imagine how adorable the baby must be in person, and my anticipation grows. When the baby was about a month old, Michael contacted me. Regina wants to have a baby reveal party. A reveal party? Yeah, at her parents' house, inviting relatives. Can we invite our side too? Thomas and the others are on board. That sounds good. Why not invite the same group as we did for the wedding? I'll do that. Then, I'll start reaching out. My relatives all live in the same state. They love events, so they'd be happy to come. As expected, when I informed them of the date, they all wanted to come. On the day, I arrived a bit early with a gift for the baby, intending to greet Regina's parents first. I rang the doorbell of the grand house, surrounded by a high fence, and a mature woman's voice responded. The parents were often away for work, so a housekeeper was always there. The person who came to the door must have been her. As I reached the grand entrance along the slope, Regina, in a floral dress, greeted me at the foyer, holding the innocent baby in her arms. Dad and Mom got called into sudden work, so they're not back yet. Busy even on a Sunday. I greeted and was about to enter when Regina coldly asked, "The gift for the baby?"
Oh, yes, here.
Handing the baby to the waiting housekeeper, Regina watched as I searched my bag. She snatched the envelope as I pulled it out and opened it right there. Are we checking gifts in front of everyone? Ignoring my surprise, Regina pulled out the contents and frowned in displeasure.
$1,000? That's too little. I thought that was the going rate. At least $50,000 should be in there.
Well, can't expect much from poor people. As Regina put the gift back into the envelope, the housekeeper stood behind her, holding the baby, who yawned adorably. Drawn by the baby's cuteness, I approached the housekeeper.
How adorable, just like an angel.
As I reached out to the baby's tightly clenched little fist.
Don't touch the baby if you're a stranger.
Startled by the sudden shout, I pulled my hand back. As the baby began to cry, Regina commanded the housekeeper.
Take him to his room, now.
Yes. After the housekeeper took the baby away, I protested to Regina.
I am Michael's mother. I'm the grandma of this child.
So? Regina smirked mischievously.
To me, you're a stranger. You're just someone unnecessary once I've gotten the congratulatory money.
That's terrible. You're stingy, just like your deli. It doesn't seem like we'll need anything from you in the future. So, this is where our relationship ends.
She fluttered her hand, shooing me away.
Thanks for your efforts. You can go home now. Don't ever show me that gloomy face again. We don't want your poverty rubbing off on our family.
I was momentarily shocked, but quickly responded with a smile.
All right then.
Leaving me at the entrance, Regina went back inside. Her words kept swirling in my head. This was the first time in my life I had been subjected to such a terrible humiliation. Why do I have to be spoken to like this by my daughter-in-law? Clenching my fists as if my bones would crush, I declared war in my heart. If that's the attitude you're going to take, I have my plans too. You'll regret this later. When I opened the front door, my relatives were crossing the garden, coming my way.
Huh? Margaret, are you leaving already?
Regina, who came out to greet them, smiled at the puzzled relatives.
Margaret has some errands to run. Dinner is about to arrive. You could have stayed and eaten with us. She's in a hurry. Welcome, everyone. It seems Michael and his parents will be a little while longer. Please make yourselves comfortable in the meantime.
Regina ushered the relatives inside, closed the front door, and immediately locked it. Regina, who is good at putting on a facade, is popular with our relatives. At my husband's anniversary memorial, she went around pouring drinks for the older men, introducing herself. Despite being beautiful and wealthy, her cheerful and friendly demeanor left a very good impression. So, no one doubted Regina's words this time. I decided to resort to my last option. I headed somewhere. 2 hours later, I pressed Regina's family's doorbell again. In front of the relatives, Regina, who reluctantly let me in, whispered to me irritably.
Why did you come back?
I forgot something important.
Huh? Oh, you brought the rest of the congratulatory money. Such a small amount was indeed embarrassing.
Passing by the smirking Regina, I proceeded down the hall filled with lively voices. Opening the door, I found a spacious dining room where both families were gathered around a huge table. Although Regina's parents and Michael were nowhere to be seen, the table was laden with appetizers, and the relatives were happily sharing beer and wine.
Margaret, you came back. Come over here. We have bourbon and cocktails too. Why not have the housekeeper bring some?
I smiled at the beckoning relatives.
Thank you, Trevor. But before that, I have something I'd like to reveal too.
Oh, what's that? A surprise gift?
To Regina's nonchalant question, I responded just as pleasantly.
Yes, a surprise. Now, everyone, please listen.
Clapping my hands, I silenced the chatter of the relatives and opened the voice recording app on my mobile phone, pressing play.
Don't touch the baby if you're a stranger.
Regina's shout echoed in the suddenly quiet room.
Is that Regina's voice?
The room buzzed with confusion.
Once you've given the congratulatory money, you're unnecessary. With your stingy delicatessen, we won't need anything from you in the future. So, this is where our relationship ends. Don't ever show that gloomy face again. We don't want your poverty rubbing off on our family.
No matter how many times I hear it, it's a terrible line. It seems I'm not the only one who thinks so, as the women in the family began to criticize Regina.
Even if a daughter-in-law and mother-in-law are traditionally at odds, this is too much. Margaret raised Michael alone while running the delicatessen, enduring so much. To belittle her like this is unforgivable. What's this? Just because her parents are wealthy, she acts so haughty. Such a nasty daughter-in-law.
Not just my relatives, but even Regina's family expressed their anger.
To say such things to your mother-in-law is unbelievable.
We're so sorry for our Regina. This is embarrassing for us too.
Being spoiled as a lady is one thing, but doesn't she know the difference between right and wrong? At her age, such lack of manners.
Faced with the cold stares of the relatives, Regina showed panic. Her cheeks twitching, she hurriedly tried to smooth things over.
Stop joking around, Margaret. Oh, I get it. You're jealous because Michael always defends me, so you made this up.
Regina covered her face with her hands and started to fake cry. I've tried so hard to get along with Margaret, and this is how she treats me? That's cruel. The women all had faces of disbelief. However, the men were easily deceived, looking confused and at each other.
Come on, that's too harsh. Yeah, ganging up on her. Poor thing, she started crying. Margaret, what's the meaning of this? Are you acting spitefully because Michael chose Regina? It's always the mother-in-law bullying the daughter-in-law, isn't it? Everyone knows Regina is a good girl. Don't pull such pranks, Margaret.
The men quickly sided with Regina, who must have been inwardly mocking them. Then the women exploded in anger.
Good girl? When we had a gathering at Margaret's, she refused to help in the kitchen, escaping to the dining area. Ignored calls for help, flirting with the men all the time. Right. When we were supposed to bring dishes for the meal, she lied about injuring her hand and brought store-bought items, then had the audacity to claim hers was the best.
Men are really weak against this type of girl. No eye for character. The dining room turned into a battleground of men versus women, mixing my relatives with Regina's. The once lively dining room was now filled with a tense atmosphere. As the housekeeper, flustered, brought in more beer, the doorbell rang. Chelsea entered the dining room, guided by the housekeeper. With a thick, bulging envelope of congratulatory money in her hand, catching Regina's eye. Chelsea, welcome, and thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. Here's the congratulatory money. Oh!
Chelsea deliberately let the envelope slip from her hand, scattering its contents across the table.
Oh dear, I forgot to seal it. Sorry about that. Huh? Who's that in the picture with Regina?
A relative picked up a photo, murmuring suspiciously. Regina turned around in shock. But before Regina could collect the photos, several relatives grabbed them, exclaiming in unison.
Whoa! This looks like evidence of an affair.
It was a sight one would want to look away from. Photos captured Regina being hugged by an unknown man, kissing as she got out of a car, and entering a hotel together. As the relatives were shocked, Regina hurriedly tried to explain.
It's not what it looks like. He's just an acquaintance. He loves physical affection. And the hotel, he said he felt sick, so I accompanied him inside.
Her excuses sounded incredibly feeble. Even the men who had defended Regina were now giving her cold looks. As if delivering the final blow, Chelsea turned on a voice recorder. And a conversation between Regina and the man played out.
Can't wait for my child to be born.
It's a hassle if your wife finds out, so let's just say it's Michael's and mine, okay?
Shame, but we have no choice.
He's so dumb, thinking you're just a friend.
Hilarious.
We can get away with it since Michael and I have the same blood type from our college days.
What if the child looks just like you? We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Their laughter ended the recording. Regina, pale-faced, turned to Chelsea.
Why do you have this? Oh, didn't I mention? I run a private investigation firm.
Chelsea smiled slightly.
Margaret asked me to look into you because of your reckless spending and suspicious behavior. And, as expected, it turned out to be an affair. I intended to keep this to myself to avoid ruining the marriage. But seeing no change in your attitude, Regina, I thought you deserved a punishment.
Regina glared at me with a venomous look.
So, it was your doing.
As Regina lunged at me, Chelsea quickly grabbed her arm, stepping in between. Shaking off Chelsea's grip, Regina threatened in a low voice.
Remember, keep quiet about this to Michael. It would be pitiful for the child to be abandoned by Dad right after being born. Everyone agrees, right?
Her self-serving logic was astounding, but Regina desperately sought agreement from the relatives.
Michael loves children, and if he remains unaware, he'll adore this child. So, let's keep this a secret, okay?
A deep, resonant voice froze everyone, including Regina and me. Looking towards the source, we saw Michael standing at the doorway. It seemed he had entered the house with Chelsea and had been eavesdropping from the hallway.
Michael.
Approaching Regina, Michael looked at her with disdain and angrily retorted.
We used to go out for drinks, the four of us, including his wife, before Regina got pregnant. I never imagined you two were meeting alone afterwards. Laughing at me, both of you. I'm sorry. Please, don't talk about divorce.
Regina pleaded with puppy eyes, but Michael shouted back.
Of course we're getting a divorce. Insulting not just me but also my mom, unforgivable.
Michael and Regina glared at each other for a while, but eventually, Regina was the first to back down.
Fine, we can get a divorce. But I'm keeping custody of the child. I've always wanted a child.
Even at this point, she insisted as if she had done nothing wrong. What an audacious woman. The relatives watched the exchange between Regina and Michael, tense. With clasped hands and a dreamy expression, Regina began to speak.
I think the child will look like me and be incredibly beautiful. Then I'll dress her in stylish clothes and take her everywhere. A young and beautiful me with a cute daughter. We could become famous as a beautiful mother-daughter duo. She's definitely going to be a model or actress someday. I'm so glad I had a daughter. Hey, children aren't accessories. Are you raising her just to show off? That's pitiful for the child. Being a single mother is tough. Do you understand what it entails to work and raise a child?
At my words, Regina laughed in a high-pitched tone.
Who do you think I am? I'm the daughter of Tucker Industries. Unlike your delicatessen, I have endless money. My dad and mom will help, and with housekeepers and babysitters, I won't have to care for the child. I can live leisurely without working hard.
After boasting, she twisted her lips into a sneer.
Well, being from a single-parent family might be disadvantageous for school applications. So I plan to remarry someone suitable. Next time, not a company employee but a handsome CEO of an IT company. Such a man would let me have more freedom to play.
Seems like it, Mr. Tucker. Chelsea called out, and Regina's parents appeared from the back door. Shocked and speechless, Chelsea explained to us.
Actually, the Tuckers asked me to investigate Regina's behavior. They pretended to go to work today but stayed hidden, wanting to expose Regina's true nature. She had always worn a mask in front of her parents.
The Tucker couple stepped into the center of the room and bowed deeply to us.
Everyone, we apologize for the disturbance Regina has caused. We don't know how to make it up to Michael and Margaret.
With a pained expression, they looked at Regina. Regina, now as pale as paper, was trembling. Thomas, Regina's father, sighed deeply and lamented in a low voice.
To betray Margaret like this. I'm ashamed of my own daughter.
But...
Regina suddenly looked up at her father. Moving closer with tearful eyes and a sweet tone, starting to make excuses.
I was bullied by Margaret. There's no proof, no images or recordings, but she said many mean things to me. It hurt, so I retaliated. Dad, you believe me, right?
As I was about to argue, Regina's mother, Selena, sharply said,
Lies! Margaret isn't like that.
Selena turned to me and declared,
As a fan of that shop, I can't accept what you've said. Take it back. What?
Regina, wide-eyed, listened as Thomas explained.
Selena and I are regulars at Margaret's Delicatessen. We often rely on it for business trips and dining with clients. For mom friends' home parties, we order delivery. That way, I only need to make desserts. The dishes with organic vegetables are famous for being healthy and delicious. I've known Margaret since before Michael's marriage. Haven't I mentioned it before? Eh? Really?
Regina, sweating profusely. She had likely been tuning it out. Selena, with a look of disgust, turned to Regina and said,
We've overlooked your whims to some extent until now, but this time, your behavior towards Michael and Margaret is inexcusable.
Exactly.
Casually lying, demeaning others. After having an affair, you plan to raise another man's child as Michael's. That's the lowest of the low.
Thomas glared at Regina with icy eyes and firmly declared,
We're disowning you as of today. What? That's troubling. What am I supposed to do starting tomorrow?
Figure it out yourself.
You're 30, aren't you?
How long do you plan to depend on others? Why don't you remarry him? He's the real dad, right? That's impossible. He said he wouldn't leave his wife. Oh no. I don't want to work.
Regina let out a pitiful cry.
Michael, I'm sorry. It was all my fault.
Regina started to deeply apologize at mine and Michael's feet.
Margaret, I'm sorry for everything. Please forgive me.
Mom, let's go home. We should get our congratulatory money back. There's no obligation to pay it to a complete stranger. Yes, let's do that. I'll take mine back too. Me too, I've lost my appetite.
Michael took the envelope from the black tray, and the other relatives followed suit.
If it's not Michael's child, there's no need for a gift. Right, it's ridiculous.
I thought it was a chance to make some pocket money by exploiting the baby.
As Regina crumbled to her knees, the relatives, without a glance in her direction, left the meal and the celebration came to a miserable end. The room was left with scattered dishes, half-drunk beverages, and meals, marking the desolate conclusion of the reveal party. Unwilling to work, Regina cried and refused the divorce but was persuaded by the Tuckers to reluctantly sign. The compensation for the divorce lawsuit was fronted by her parents. Afterward, Regina was kicked out of her home. She moved into an apartment with moving and initial costs borrowed from her parents, starting to live alone. The Tuckers decided they couldn't leave the baby with Regina and chose to raise it themselves. They also demanded child support and recognition from the baby's father, who complied. Regina, who had lived a life of leisure, must be struggling with her first part-time job. After all, she has to pay back her parents for the moving expenses and compensation, in addition to her living costs. Regina, now deprived of the luxury to dress fashionably or enjoy leisure activities, seems to be working desperately every day, her hair disheveled. Though Michael and I have cut ties with Regina, our relationship with the Tucker couple continues. After the reveal party, the parents came to me with an apology gift. We were wrong in how we raised her. We're terribly sorry to both Michael and Margaret. Their tearful apologies eased some of my unresolved anger. Thankfully, they continue to frequent the delicatessen, which has thrived on word of mouth and has more customers now than it did 10 years ago. I'm currently busy preparing for the opening of a second location. Michael, too, seems to have regained his spirits and is diligently working. Both of us are living busy yet fulfilling lives. Someday, if fate allows and Michael has his own child, we plan to shower that child with endless love.
Are you trying to ruin our wedding?
It's not like that. I just wanted to say that you're spending too much money unnecessarily.
I know you are poor, but Ryan is going to be the next president of the company, right? He doesn't need to worry about money.
Even if he is the next president, this is too much.
That's not true. I just wanted to see your happy face, and when I told Ryan that, he was willing to do anything I said.
What?
It seems he really likes you. He generously spent money whenever it was for you.
Her words hit me like a stab with a knife. As I looked at her face in surprise, and she looked back at me with a sly smile.
You took advantage of his feelings for me.
Anger welled up inside me. To that, Jessica added another shocking statement.
So what? If you're going to complain more, can you please leave? We don't need a low-educated, poor mother. Please don't associate with us ever again.
Her words, filled with a sense of superiority, rapidly fueled my anger. I won't forgive this. Enjoy your triumph while it lasts. As she walked away looking down on me, I stared at her back, making a firm resolution to attend the reception. My name is Amy. I was widowed and now live with my son Ryan. My parents' home was poor, so I started working right after graduating from junior high. Later, I met and married a man who started his own company. Decades later, even when my husband's business stabilized and we had more financial freedom, my habit of saving remained, and I still live that way today. Neither my husband nor Ryan ever spoke ill of my frugality. Instead, they accepted it and joined me in being economical. Ryan, with his generous nature, even now as a working adult, accepts my frugality without complaint. After my husband passed away, the company is now led by my brother-in-law, Dylan, as the president. Ryan works there and is a candidate for the next president. Despite this, he hasn't let it go to his head and continues to live as usual. He, whom I raised alone after my husband's death, is my pride and joy. Sometimes I worry that he's too considerate and putting himself under strain, but his kindness is also something I'm proud of. Since working for the company, he has become even more independent, and recently he has become a very reliable man. So, when he told me he had a girlfriend, I felt a bit lonely, but I was happy enough to genuinely wish them well.
She was introduced to me by a friend, and she's really a great person.
He spoke with joy, and I smiled back.
I want to start a family soon to give Mom peace of mind. That's why I'm thinking about marrying my girlfriend.
Oh, thank you. But you haven't been together that long, right? Don't rush into marriage just because you're worried about me. It's your life, Ryan. Make sure you make the decision for yourself. It's heartwarming to know he cares about me. But I didn't want him to choose his life partner just to reassure his mother. However, knowing that he has a girlfriend, seeing how happy he is, and above all, realizing how much he thinks of me, warms my heart. I thought to myself how lucky I am to have him. 6 months after hearing about his girlfriend, they seemed really serious about marriage, and he said she would be coming to our house. Though he had spoken about his girlfriend Jessica before, this would be my first time meeting her. I was looking forward to meeting Jessica, who might become his wife.
Amy, is it true you didn't go to college? And yet you managed to raise such a fine child as Ryan.
This was said by Jessica after we introduced ourselves and chatted a bit, while Ryan had stepped away from the table. She looked at me with a provocative gaze.
Yes. He has really grown up to be a fine young man.
I barely managed to reply, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of discomfort from her words. Though she seemed to be praising him, I felt there was a mocking tone towards me.
Fine, huh? You don't hold back on the praise. Usually, people are more modest. Oh, maybe you don't know these common social norms, not having gone to college. What? Sorry, I was just wondering. It's really amazing, though. Raising a child in a fatherless home, I could never do that.
Her words said one thing, but her mouth was slightly smirking.
What were you two talking about?
When he returned and asked, she promptly replied.
We were just talking about how amazing Amy is for raising such a wonderful person like you. I really respect Amy.
She said this with a smile at me. But I felt a thorn in her words and couldn't help feeling uneasy.
That's right. He is going to be the next president, isn't he?
The conversation shifted to the future of the two of them, and inevitably to his upcoming promotion. Jessica seemed captivated by the idea of he becoming the next president. In contrast, he responded calmly.
It's just because my uncle is the president, and that's what people say. I'm still inexperienced and need to study and grow more. It's Dad's company, so I can't take over halfway and let it fail. What? But you'll become the president eventually, right?
She asked, a bit flustered.
I'll work hard to make that happen.
He replied with a smile, but she seemed somewhat unsatisfied.
Before talking about being president, I need to get promoted first. The responsibilities vary with each position, and I need to understand those roles too.
When I gave this advice, he nodded firmly. Her eyes sparkled again.
When you get promoted, your salary will increase, right? Since you're talked about as the next president, I guess your income will keep getting better.
Her interest seemed piqued by words like next president and salary. The discomfort I felt towards her remained even after she left.
Hey, I hate to say this, but do you think Jessica is marrying you for your money? She seemed really interested in your salary and the talk of you becoming the next president.
I couldn't help but ask him. It's his life and his family. I may not have a right to interfere, but I couldn't stay silent, considering his happiness. But Ryan denied it.
I don't think so. She is concerned about money because she plans to manage our finances after we get married. Finances are important in marriage.
Oh, so you two have talked it over.
Yeah. She said she would manage our finances after we marry. She's always been responsible, so it'll be fine.
If that's the case.
Mom, I'm 28 now. I'm an adult, so don't worry about me that much.
His smile swept away my worries. Seeing his expression, I came to a realization. Maybe I was just feeling something like jealousy towards her. Is this how a mother feels when her son is getting married? That thought strangely made sense to me. But I would later realize that this idea was a mistake. A year after meeting Jessica, their wedding is today. I don't know any details about the wedding. She asked me not to interfere too much. Indeed, the wedding is about the two of them, and it's an important event for their future married life. I decided to quietly watch over them and looked forward to this day. But, when I arrived at the venue, I was so surprised that I was rooted to the spot. Because the rented venue was decorated so lavishly, it was beyond what ordinary people could afford. In the waiting room, there was a quiz corner where guests could guess the color of the dress Jessica would wear for her dress change. I had seen such features in weddings before, but there was one clear difference this time. There were 2 dress changes, and the dresses were in 2 different colors. Furthermore, the menu listed ingredients that were extravagantly high-end. Even the entertainment included a professional magician. I had attended many weddings, but this was the first time I saw one so luxurious and obviously expensive. I never imagined experiencing this at my own son's wedding. It was just too much. Feeling anxious and worried about their wedding, I decided I had to talk to Ryan and headed to their waiting room. Then I saw Dylan and Jessica. She was humbly and politely responding to Dylan's congratulations.
Thank you so much. Please continue to look after him. I'll do my best to support him too.
Of course. We have high hopes for him. I'm counting on you as well.
Yes, I'll do my utmost.
As she smiled at me, Jessica's expression turned scornful in an instant. Feeling uneasy, I hurried over to her. Then I asked about the situation.
Jessica, it's been a while. You told me not to interfere too much, so I've been quiet, but isn't this too extravagant? One dress change is enough. The wedding should be more modest.
While I was flustered, she looked relaxed and unapologetically replied, "It's already decided. Bringing it up now is troublesome." My mind went blank, unable to find words. She then looked at me with the same provocative eyes as when we first met.
Are you trying to ruin our wedding?
It's not like that. I just wanted to say that you're spending too much money unnecessarily.
I know you are poor, but Ryan is going to be the next president, right? He doesn't need to worry about money.
Even if he is the next president, this is too much.
That's not true. I just wanted to see your happy face, and when I told him that, he was willing to do anything I said.
What?
It seems he really likes you. He generously spent money whenever it was for you. Her words hit me like a stab with a knife. Shocked, I looked at her face, and she was giving me a disdainful look.
You took advantage of his feelings for me.
Anger welled up inside me. To that, she added another shocking statement. So what? If you're going to complain more, can you please leave? We don't need a low-educated, poor mother. Please don't associate with us ever again. Her words, filled with a sense of superiority, rapidly fueled my anger. I won't forgive this. Enjoy your triumph while it lasts. I, seething with anger but resolute, stared at her back as she walked away, looking down on me, and then I joined the reception.
May I now have Amy, the mother of the groom, come forward?
The MC announced, guiding me to the microphone. I knew I had to give a speech, as Ryan had informed me beforehand, but it seemed Jessica was unaware. The situation was different from what I had imagined. Jessica, who had told me to leave, was now silently exuding a disgruntled aura as I, who she told to leave, was about to give a speech. Thank you all for joining us today to celebrate the marriage of Ryan and Jessica. Ryan and I have always supported each other throughout our lives. I began my speech, sharing my thoughts about Ryan. After narrating old episodes, I continued.
However, it seems that from today, I must let go of him. Therefore, I am firing him.
The room erupted in murmurs. Dylan, along with other company attendees, looked shocked and confused. The noise in the room grew louder. Among them, Jessica was the first to speak out.
Fired? What are you talking about? Amy, who isn't even part of the company, can't make such decisions. You should think before you speak. Even as a mother, there are limits.
Jessica, what are you saying?
I am firing Ryan. You said you didn't need a low-educated, poor me, and told me to never associate with you again. That's... Moreover, it seems you were only after his money. And Ryan, choosing someone like you, I can't trust him anymore. That's why I am firing him.
My words intensified the murmurs in the room. Jessica, her harsh words exposed, turned red-faced. Ryan, glaring at her, questioned.
What do you mean a low-educated, poor mom is unnecessary? Did you say that to Mom? And about being after money.
It's fine, isn't it? We're going to live together. We don't need your mom, who has neither education nor money. Even if she says that, she can't fire you.
Mom is the chairperson of my company.
What?
Her face, which was red, now turned pale upon hearing his words. In a clearly panicked tone, she responded.
But, you said she didn't go to college. How can someone like that be a chairperson?
That's the truth. The company was started by Dad. Mom has been involved since its foundation. Now, she understands the company more than anyone and holds the real executive power.
Why didn't you tell me such important things earlier? If you had, none of this would have happened.
Instead of apologizing, she began blaming him. But he looked at her with disdain.
I plan to tell you about the company's details eventually. But now, there's no need. The marriage is off, so there's no need to explain anymore.
What? What do you mean the marriage is off?
It's obvious. I can't marry you, who looks down on Mom and is only after money. The wedding is cancelled.
His voice carried an air of authority. Jessica, realizing the gravity of the situation, suddenly turned to me, desperately seeking support.
Please forgive me, Amy. I didn't know you were the chairperson, and I was terribly rude. I won't belittle you anymore.
She said, but of course, I had no intention of forgiving her.
That's impossible. You mean you would have continued to belittle me if I weren't the chairperson? I can't be family with someone who can't respect others and whose hobby is squandering money. Goodbye.
With that, I started to leave the venue. Following me, Dylan stood up, and then the other attendees began to prepare to leave.
Wait, please don't go, everyone!
She screamed, but no one even looked at her with sympathy. My relatives expressed relief that he hadn't married such a person, and Jessica's relatives looked utterly disgusted. Her friends, who had been condescending thinking she would become a CEO's wife, were also displeased with her recent attitude and quickly began to leave. Everyone left Jessica standing there, stunned. Ryan and I returned the wedding gifts, apologizing to the guests as we saw them off. After everyone had left, he muttered apologetically.
Mom, I'm sorry. I wanted to reassure you, but instead, it turned out we can't even work together anymore. That's why I told you not to worry about me so much. And about the firing, that's no longer happening. I said I couldn't trust you who choose a partner only after money. That's why I was going to fire you. But now that the marriage with Jessica is off, I won't fire you.
He looked perplexed by my words.
Thank you, Mom. I'll work even harder from now on. Your happiness is what matters most to me.
I gently patted his back. Later, he officially broke off the engagement with Jessica, and they decided to split the wedding costs. Jessica had assumed Ryan would pay for the entire wedding and keep the gifts from her attendees for herself. Unable to pay her credit card bills for the esthetician, beauty salon, and other expenses, she ended up in debt. She, already unemployed and without money, hastily tried to marry for money again, but her next partner turned out to be a marriage scammer, further increasing her debt. Now, her whereabouts are unknown. Meanwhile, our family bond strengthened even more after this incident. Ryan seemed to respect me more than ever, now focusing on work rather than marriage to reassure me. Thanks to his dedication, the company grew even more. Recently, the president of a company we've long done business with introduced his daughter to Ryan. I've worked with his daughter a few times, and Ryan seems quite interested in this new acquaintance. It looks like a wonderful meeting for him, who has now fully grown into a fine man, and I'm excited for him.